As we get started, this is a rare opportunity for all of us to be with such skilled craftspeople as we get ourselves wired in. As you know, this is an audience of directors and assistant directors and production managers, associate directors. This is an audience of your peers who are here to, in fact, learn from you. That's what this is about. And as we get wired in, I'm thinking we're going to talk about stages of filmmaking. And of course, you know the 5 primary stages of filmmaking. The first stage being enthusiasm. And the second stage being panic. And the third stage being search for the guilty ones. The fourth, punishment of the innocents. And the fifth, rewards to the non-participants, rewards to the non-participants. Anyway, we're not going to be handling those 5. We're going to be handling others. Now that you're wired in, I got myself covered here. Since we're interested in learning from you, my first question is, what have you learned from other directors? Anything specific that you learned from another director? Ridley? Wait a minute, before we say Ridley, let's introduce him, eh? Ridley Scott, who did The Martian. George Miller, who did Mad Max Fury Road. Alejandro Iñárritu, who did The Revenant. Tom McCarthy, who did Spotlight. And Adam McKay, who did The Big Short. You know, look, the truth is your films speak for yourselves. You don't have to say anything. We'll just be silent and just look at all films here. That really is the job. And I know talking about movie making, it's fascinating in its own right, but it is not the thing itself. The thing itself is what you actually do. But you're all articulate men. You all have perspective on the process, so we're going to examine the process to some degree. And I am interested. Ridley, what have you learned, if anything specific, from other directors, even if it's seeing their work, or actually advice other directors may have ever given you?
It goes back, it's a learning curve. It's a long learning curve. When I was seriously thinking about even dreaming I might do this, all the titles were run at the beginning of the movie. Some people remember that. And I always wondered, how the hell do you get to be a director? And I didn't quite know what it meant. But I understood what art director meant, so I figured, because I was good at art, that's what I was going to go for through art school. The directing process didn't really start for a number of years. And the biggest advice I can give to anyone is no one's going to give you the job. You've got to go and create the job. And so one day I sat down, wrote a script, borrowed a Bolex clockwork camera, which ran 1 minute, and bullied a young man who was then 14 called Tony Scott into getting out of bed in his summer holidays because he'd lie until 2 p.m., seriously. And that changed later. Tony would get up at 5 a.m. and say, we're going to go make a movie. And we went and made a movie. The upshot was it lasted about 5 weeks. Cut it together. It's in the BFI right now. Got me my first job. And the process of sitting there in freezing cold in Redcar near Port Clarence in Durham was you have an instruction book and you have little filters because it's a black and white camera. I want it to look like Kurosawa with my brother sitting there shivering, complaining. But I didn't realize that this was going to be our legacy for life. We were now on a learning curve as film directors. Starts there. Then, of course, there's all the good guys, David Lean, Orson Welles, all those people that once you've done one little one, you start to think like David Lean suddenly, you know. You're not going to get there for a long time. It's a learning curve.
Got it. George, any advice from any director that you ever encountered, or having seen other directors work, what inspired you?
Well, I like just about everybody else. You learn in the cinema. You learn by watching. But then you watch what people do. And back in Australia, when I started, there were other people in filmmakers cooperative, but there were no directors you could directly learn from. However, I started to read the books, and those interview books, by the way, where you'd, for instance, those AFI legendary directors, where and you'd pick up directors with whom you felt simpatico, And the one, I mean, so many of them, but the one that seemed to be able to say it in the pithiest way was Hitchcock. I loved just when he, it directly influenced the Fury Road movie, when he said, I try to make movies where they don't need to read the subtitles in Japan. That was a big one for me. And I love the other one, which he said about suspense. Everyone knows it, but the suspense and surprise, which is that suspense is when you expect something to happen and it doesn't, and surprise is the opposite, when something happens when you don't expect it. He said, surprise is only one moment. Suspense can last almost a whole movie. Those simple little things were very important. But then, without making this a long answer, I did, when others in Australia were making movies, for instance, Peter Weir gave me some really, really valuable advice. I just finished the first Mad Max. It was, I'd never really been on a movie set before. I thought if you really planned the movie and you went out and shot it, that it basically would go okay. And I was completely bewildered by the process. It was, you know, I describe it like a big dog. You want to take it for a walk that way and it drags you off this way. And I remember sitting down talking to Peter, who'd already done about 2 movies, and I said, I'm not cut out for this. And he said, but George, don't you realize that every movie is like this? You've got to think of it. It wasn't long after the Vietnam War, and he said, you've got to think about it like being on patrol in the jungle, and you've got to complete some sort of mission. You don't know where the landmines are, you don't know where the snipers are, but somehow you've got to find your way through it. So be alive to the adjustments that you need to make, and it's never going to be any different. And I then went on pretty soon after to make the second Mad Max, which was way more difficult than the first one. But with that advice in my head, I thought, okay, this is what the real world is like. And it's still like that. So that was very valuable.
Good advice. Good advice. Thank you. Alejandro, advice other directors gave you or inspired by other directors?
Yeah, I was lucky. I was in radio, so I was doing a lot of things in audio that were kind of a little storytelling, provoking characters and things. That was very good for me, and then I was lucky to have the opportunity to start shooting some commercials in Mexico. So I started shooting things, and once I was in the set, I was learning. I didn't study cinema. I was self-made, kind of understanding what was a set, a camera, 2 actors, and all things, and I had a great chance to fail and do so very bad things in this kind of little exercise. And I started thinking, I know how to do that. And then I was lucky to suddenly I felt that I was limited. I was just shooting things, but there was no understanding of many things. And I went into a theater class with a great teacher that was called Ludwig Margules, which he was from Poland, and he was a very minimalistic, very theoretical kind of genius guy, who actually, I think, studied with him 3 years theater. Really, he was the one who implanted in me what really means to be a director, what the responsibility you have in the set. I mean, his theory was you have to know more than anybody if you want to command people. So if you don't know about architecture or lighting or painting or dancing or narrative or drama, you really need to be responsible to be heading a bunch of people that will be very well prepared. And so I was panicked. I was terrified. I said, I better start really going. Suddenly he implanted in me the responsibility that you have when you go into the set commanding that. And I think I learned a lot from him. I remember that the best thing that he told me was, we were doing these little plays in the room, and I was kind of insecure and unsafe, and I asked a friend of mine, a production designer, to put some, a book stand and a table and blah, blah, blah. So the play finished, and then in front of the class, he literally humiliated me, as he should do. And he destroyed people in front of everybody, but he gave you big lessons. And he said, why you need this table? Why you need a book stand? Why you need this? I mean, like these props. And he said, can you don't convey me? Can you not convince me? Because he was from this Polish theater, like black theater, like abstract. And he was from this theory that if you cannot get only with the imagination and the actors and the pace and the things that the people imagine that universe without any element, then you are a failure. And he was right. I didn't need these shitty things in a room, in a classroom. You know what I mean? I said, yes. So it was like the economic of things, like go to the DNA. And then, I started studying another person that I think was crucial for me, which I think is here. Where is Judith Weston? Are you here? Judith is one of the best teachers I have, and amazing. She has, books that really has inspired me, and I studied with her directing actors, and all the methods of Judith I really assimilate in a practical way. And then, obviously, as they are saying, watching films and reading Sculpting in Time of Tarkovsky changed my life. And when I see a filmmaker doing things that I don't understand, and probably will never be able to do, just implant me a poise that bites me, and I want to make something like that, and maybe I will never do, but that excites me and inspires me to keep doing and learning the process.
Thank you. Tom, for you, any advice that another director gave you or inspired by other directors?
Probably both. It's funny, panic seems to be the theme throughout all these answers, which makes me feel so much better. I was a little panicked back there watching the clips together, which was pretty wonderful. When I was making my first film, The Station Agent, I had written this screenplay and been trying to get it made for years and was having a lot of trouble. And it finally happened very quickly. I had like $500,000, which at that time I thought was quite a bit of money. And I was really excited. And then as I got closer and closer and closer, I just had one of those moments of like, I'm an absolute fake. I really don't know what I'm doing. And I've convinced just enough people that I've started this train. And I really, it was like sort of the actor's nightmare in some way. And I went in, Sidney Lumet at that point was sort of my mentor. And I just called him and I was like, I have to come up. He was on the Upper West Side, I was downtown. And I have to talk to you because I think I may be having my first panic attack in my life. And he was like, oh, great, sweetheart, come right up. You know Sid, that's everything. And yeah, he called me sweetheart quite a few times. But I think he called everyone that. But I went up there, and he just knew where I was at. Like instantly, he was a master, and I was in his office, and I was an idiot. And he just did a great job of sort of sitting me down and letting me talk for about 20 minutes, and said, great. And then he said, to his, I think it's Penny, his longtime assistant, can you get me the script of The Verdict? And she brought in his shooting script, and he just sat next to me and kind of flipped through the shooting script of The Verdict with his notes. And said, it's really not that hard. Look, see, I just the camera, and I'm going to do this, and look at that. And it's open on the pinball machine, and then and he just kind of talked me through like half The Verdict. And in some weird way, it should have been ultimately incredibly intimidating. I mean, because I thought, well, I'm obviously never going to ever do that. But it was weirdly liberating because he just made it so, he really broke it down in such a simple way. And he just talked about, ultimately, I think my biggest fear at the time was just camera and blocking and how I was going to approach this film. And he just talked about really understanding what a movie was about and forcing myself as a director to take one final look at each scene and say, make sure you understand. Because I think as a writer, it's sometimes tricky because you live with the screenplay for so long. You think you understand it. And sometimes I think we all know you really don't understand it till after you've made the damn movie. But like going back at that last moment and being like, do I really understand exactly? And he said, if you understand exactly what that scene, you can shoot that scene very quickly. You'll know how you want to do it. You'll be able to impart that and articulate those ideas to your collaborators, and they will assist you in that, but it'll be crystal clear. And that somehow I thought, okay, that's something I can do. I can understand what this scene, and I have a place, a toehold in this process. So that Sid was, and he continued, and then visually he just continues to be a huge inspiration to me. So maybe that's a 2-in-1.
Very fortunate to have the master talk to you.
Incredibly fortunate, incredibly fortunate.
Adam, for you, advice from other directors or directors who inspired you?
I think the big inspiration was when I was 17 years old, I watched Blue Velvet. And I watched it like at 9 o'clock at night. I went to sleep. And the next morning I got up and I was like, I dreamt that. There's no way I just saw a guy sing Candy Colored Clown into a Klieg light. And I had to go put the VHS tape back on and watch it again. And there were other directors at that time, like Alex Cox was a guy that I loved. And so pretty quickly I started realizing I love controlled chaos. I love when you don't know what's going to happen, yet there's a hand behind it. So I remember when we were shooting Anchorman, and we're shooting this crazy battle sequence where the news teams are all fighting. And at one point, I had a guy on fire. I had Steve Carell killing a guy with a trident. And this is all happening at once. A lot like Alejandro's scene we just saw. I don't want to argue about which is better. We can talk about that later. We were in a parking lot in downtown LA, which I think is where Alejandro shot his scene. But I remember having this moment of kind of glory of this is controlled chaos. So I always point to Lynch and Alex Cox as two guys that really influenced me.
Did anyone actually, any other director actually give you any specific advice? Because I know you've worked with others.
There was one guy I hung out, believe it or not, with Julian Schnabel for a little while in New York City. And I asked him at one point, I go, how do you make this jump from being this brilliant painter to like making these really good movies? Like he's a serious filmmaker. And he just said, it's all choices. He goes, it's the same thing. He goes, I make the same choices when I'm going to break the plates and paint on them, or I'm going to do the girl with the line through her eyes. I'm choosing the colors, I'm choosing the palette, I'm choosing the subject. And he said, I view directing as the exact same thing. It's thousands and thousands of choices. And he's like, I don't know how to operate a camera. I mean, I do a little bit, but he said, I don't know about the lens sizes, but I know the choices. And that was like, I started primarily as a writer, even though I did a bunch of short films on Saturday Night Live. But hearing that really kind of opened film up for me and made me not insecure to be with like, in the case of this movie, like a master DP like Barry Ackroyd. I could openly joke with Barry Ackroyd about how I don't know what that lens is. And we had ongoing bits where I would recommend made-up lenses to him. And you're going to use the Dubon 130. It's out of Madagascar. It might blow up, but give it a try. And once I kind of gave up that pretense of I have to know everything, it's just not the kind of director I am, then I was able to get into the flow with the technical side of it. It kind of freed it up for me. But that came from Schnabel, just saying it's just a series of choices.
You know, Ridley, in your movie, thank you, there's a line where, I think near the end, which sort of summarizes the process, which is first you solve one problem, then you solve the next problem and the next, and if you solve enough problems, you get to go home. So it seems to be problem after problem after problem. One of the things I want to talk about first is, in fact, pre-production, which is a bizarre time because, as you just talked about choices, there's so many choices that, you know, what location, who are we going to put in it, who are we going to work with, that it's a very sort of imbalanced time. Things aren't quite defined yet, and I'd like to talk about pre-production. I'm going to start talking specifically about your casting process. And what I'd like to look at is, I was just thinking this up here, if you were casting somebody to be the moderator of this particular symposium and a bunch of actors came in, how would you go about casting them? And we don't have to play that, but what I'm interested in... Huh? Got it, okay. What I'm interested in is when the actor is not somebody you're making an offer to. You already know that you want this person in your movie. But it's an actor who you're now going to discover. You know this is part. So I'm interested in how you go about that process, really, if an actor is coming in, or whether actors come in now. Maybe you see them all on tape and digital. How do you go through the process of choosing? I'm thinking specifically one actor. You may have offered it to him, but the one who plays Rich Parnell, who plays the astrodynamic guy. He's wonderful in the movie. It's not he's in 2 or 3 scenes, and so not a lot. What was the process for you when you're looking for an actor that isn't already somebody you know you want to offer? What do you do?
As we all probably have different methods of working, I think we all do. I mean, and I'm a 2-take Charlie. I'll take 2 takes. In fact, I said to Matt, he said, how many takes do you take? I said, 2. He said, so what was it like with Clint? He said, well, he takes 1. And I discovered way back when I a very extended commercial career. My film school was 2,000 commercials. Right. So I could hit the ball from any direction, knew every lens inside out. and could walk on a set barely doing any homework and say, right, we put up 4 cameras, one there, but that. With that, you have to, people say, well, you don't need a camera. On the contrary, I need a really great cameraman because I'm really going to push it. So when you extend to 11 cameras, it's all about knowledge and intuition. I function entirely by intuition. So frequently, and once you've got the script, assuming you have the script, even as we're evolving the script, and I spend a lot of time with writers, and as the more and more time I spend with the writer, I'm already starting to see the film in my head because I can storyboard. And so I've already filmed the film on paper before I even start filming in my head. Mm-hmm. And the casting, I've already thought about the first 2 or 3 characters. So that said, you still need a great casting director. So then casting director turns up, who I use 1 of 2 here and 1 of 2 in London. And if they're available, and I said, I thought of blah, blah, blah. Normally they say, yeah, if we can get them, we'll go for that. And then there's a myriad, usually, of other people to cast. And that's when I then start to commune with the casting director. And I always try to, if I can, find people I haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. And always trying to look for new people. You know, Brad Pitt, Sigourney Weaver hadn't done a movie. And I always remember with Sigourney, I had to, somebody said, there's this very tall girl doing off-Broadway theatre. Better go and see her. So I met with her. She turned up, she's like 6'6" in high heels. And she's got an afro, so she's like, I'm like a midget by her. And I met her, and it was all intuition.
Do you then, for example, there's a character, I think the character's called Bruce in the piece.
In where?
He's the one who is the JPL guy, the Asian.
Yeah.
Do you see these?
But the guy who runs JPL.
That's right.
Well, I'd worked with him twice before because I like him a lot.
Got it.
And also he'd done this marvelous TV show where he's playing not Genghis Khan, but Kublai Khan.
Right.
Put on 60 pounds. So, and I've worked with him twice in the past.
But when you've worked with someone or when you find somebody who you've not worked with before, I'm interested in that. Yeah. I don't know if there's anybody in the cast who were people that you've not worked before.
25 years ago, I'd read everybody.
Got it.
I'd be in the room reading with everybody. And then you discover things for your own process. And my process is I think a read is entirely artificial.
Right.
And therefore, I will look at faces, and it's nearly always a visual thing. I look at faces, think, interesting. Can I see their work? I'll always look at their work before I meet them.
Got it.
Because I think when you're walking a person in the room who sits down then and says, you want to read, it's not a good place to do it. And it's not really a rehearsal. So it's unfair, I think. So if I've already seen what they can do, if I really like them, I'm halfway into the field already. So when I meet them, I usually talk about everything but the film. I want to know who they are. I want to know what they think about everything from politics to art. I really don't care. Chat, because what I'm looking for in an actor is somebody's going to surprise me. My job as a director, if I get a take and go, wow, I then say, do you want to go again? Because I've got it. And if they say I want to go again, I say, absolutely, so we'll go again. But so I always try and conform over the years, realize I must have to be in partnership with the person I'm bringing in.
When you're in that room and having a conversation about anything, have you noticed any particular item in those conversations that will reveal who that person is?
Yeah, when they start literally talking about the character. Because I think what's interesting, you first of all get them relaxed, because I don't care who the actor is. They're going to come in having never met you, they're not going to be relaxed. My job is to relax them in both there and on the floor. If I create a situation, an environment of safety for the actor then blossoms because everyone in that room is wanting them to do well in that particular take. And therefore, they just open up. And so it becomes much more of a rehearsal. Every take is like a rehearsal, even though I shoot on rehearsal. I never rehearse.
But in the casting session, I'm going to do this one more time. In that process, as you're in conversation with them, are there any subjects that you know, boy, if they'll talk about their family or if they'll talk about whatever, I'll see who they are better than I might.
Well,
something
it's
else.
a bit like being an interviewer. You kind of, it is as quietly as a relaxed interview. And so I'm trying to pull them out, even to being rude sometimes, saying, this is fucking boring. You know, do you want to ask me something? And they go, oh, okay. So it all adjusts and changes. So I learned to drop in time bombs to actually kind of sometimes shock them. And they kind of like that. I said, just joking, you know. And then it's about getting the person relaxed, because I have great admiration for actors. There's no way I'm going to stand in front of a glass thing and reveal myself the way the best do.
Yeah.
That's courage.
Yeah.
That's courage under fire.
I agree. Thank you. Great. George, there's some amazing characters and actors in your piece. Some of them, you again, like Ridley, you may have known them, like the guy who plays Nux or Rictus, the brother character. They're just, what is your process if you haven't already seen that person's work? How do you meet them? How do you get accustomed? What happens with you in a casting session?
Well, one thing I know, it's different for each film. It's a different exercise. If there's lots of dialogue, then you're basically working off the existing material. But in Fury Road was atypical in that there's very little dialogue. Yet I needed to know that people could go out there and bring a character with the proper preparation and so on. So some of the actors, of course, I knew. I hadn't known Charlize Theron, Tom Hardy. I didn't know Nick Holt. And in fact, looking back on it, I didn't know most of the cast. But what I did, we did two things because we were casting out of Australia, United States, and Britain. We gave actors a choice. This is being taped with very good casting agents, and we gave them a choice of a number of scenes to play, very wordy scenes, scenes from Network, the big monologues from Network. There was the dead parrot scene from Monty Python, love scenes, just a whole mixture of scenes, and they just got the sides, maybe 1 or 2 pages, and by that very choice they made, was very, very interesting. If someone who, you know, a young female actor chose to do Monty Python rather than do, say, a love scene or something, that was very, very interesting. And then when we narrowed it down, and
these scenes were all done on tape, so you're seeing
this was initially on tape, right. And then when we narrowed it down, I worked with Nico Lathouris, who was one of the writers and also a fine dramaturg himself, and we would do pretty extensive work with the actors. Nick Holt, who I'd seen very young, I think it was 4 hours, but we always match up 2 actors, and they'd work together around a scene, and just to understand their agility, their flexibility, and basically have a good time with them.
But you'd work with 2 actors in this casting process, so maybe 2 people.
Yeah, usually, yeah, it was 2 people, not necessarily up for the same role, right. But and again, it was scenes that we wrote, nothing to do with the movie, but around that, just to see the way they approached the work, and it was very interesting. And what I like is that eventually they said, oh, they had a good time at least in that process. Exactly what you said, Ridley. It's so much about relaxation, creating the safe space and so on. So, but ultimately, it's all an intuitive process, but that intuition is informed by kind of intellectual rigor. I won't say intellectual, but you have to think it through, and then the final decision is just like falling in love. Who
do you ever go through the agonizing, oh, this one or that one, and I like both of them, and how do you make that decision at the moment when you're saying, this is the one I'm going with?
I have done, and not necessarily in this movie, because it's all pretty clear. But you're also you're also mixing and matching. You're putting a group of people together. So, and in this case, you really have to look at the colours and everything that you think that person might bring.
Were there parts for you in this that were challenges to find? Other than, I suspect, the little man with the binoculars, I suspect there was, you had to find him and found him. But
well, I made that role for him. I needed, he was somebody I knew, a wonderful guy, Quentin, and Quentin Kennehan, and he's a film director, and he has that soft bone disease, but he does commercials, he does video clips and so on, and I thought, is there a way that we could fit him in? And then it suddenly occurred to me, he would be, he would work because he's not very mobile and so on. But
well, that's an interesting idea. That's adapting a role for a personality, a human being that you're really interested in having in your movie.
Well, he suited it very, very much, and he was very interesting. And it wasn't just, I'll make a role for you. It was, okay, this is what he's able to bring. I tried to fit him in somewhere else, didn't work, and then it certainly occurred to me, this could really serve the story. Ultimately, the Morton Joe, the tyrant, is looking for healthy heirs, and he has two sons. One is a child in a man's body, and the other is a man in a child's body. And so that was very interesting.
Were there parts that were difficult, that were challenges for you to find?
Max was difficult until Tom Hardy walked in the room. Charlize, there was no one else I thought about. The rest of them, to get the balance of the 5 wives, they all had to be different in some way.
And did you see all 5 together, like you were just saying?
We never, before we started preparing for the shoot, I never saw the 5 of them together because they were from different countries. But once we started workshopping,
right.
But I sort of.
We're getting Adam a much better chair. Now, if you guys want your chairs changed, just let us know and we'll get you a better chair. He's the tallest, so now he's not the tallest, so he honored it. But
I didn't know it was going to be that long, so I was like,
good. I'm glad. Thanks.
A better chair. I'm 6'5".
In the past, I've had roles I never thought I could cast, and then at a certain point, it was really interesting. At a certain point, you lock into somebody, and you think no one else can play them. And we know, so historically, people desperately wanted to play one role, and someone else plays it iconically. So you've got to be open. But I remember Jack Nicholson, I think is one of the wisest men I ever met, said, just remember that once you've cast the movie, that person is perfect for the role. and I think that's true.
That's great. I like that one. Thank you for that. Alejandro, what parts were challenges for you? I'm wondering whether some of the indigenous parts were challenges, but I have no idea. So that's why I'm asking which parts were challenges, and what's your process when you're meeting somebody in a casting room, if you are?
Mm-hmm. I think for me is one of the most terrifying moments, and one of the most difficult and uncomfortable, because you have to make tough choices, and I know that if you make a mistake there, a bad decision, I think it's very hard to save a movie. So I mean, I think is one of the biggest decisions. This is the foundation of a movie. Depending on the material, as George was saying, I mean, depending if the material is a lot of dialogue or it's just about presence and physical energy or whatever, but there's so many layers, and every decision that you make will impact many factors for the success of what you are trying to convey. And I always think that if an actor or an actress performs bad in a film, it's not their fault. It's our fault, because I think if you mistake a cast, is one of the biggest responsibilities as a director, that decision. So that's why for me it's very stressful. And the method or the process that I have been through in different films is depend in the material. And so for example, I always feel that one of the biggest things for me is, first of all, what I want to say, what this character needs to say, what means, what is in the role. And then as everything, I mean, I think the tools are available to say things clearly, as the words are available for writers to say the things more clearly. So it's depending how you use them. Everything is there. So you have a lot of choices sometimes. And that's sometimes very more problematic when you have infinite choices. And the puzzle is more complicated. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is, I think for me, the most important thing when I'm casting is, first of all, I never cast before I have a complete script that I'm happy with. So, I mean, I never... I never had somebody like say, I want to make a film with no. I think once the script is finished is when I really start getting into, and because that will inform me. And then when I have some ideas, if I met the actor, I think the most important thing for me is the emotional baggage of the people. You know, that they have something that I know that they can bring to the character, but that they own in real life. You understand what I'm saying? I think there's something, because there can be incredible crafted actors or actresses, but maybe they don't have that emotional baggage or that thing that will be easy for them to go and look in their own story and to bring it to the character without me trying to explain what is that. Not as a notion, but as an emotional experience that they are related to that. So when some physical person is great for the part by age and whatever, race and everything, and then I found that, as Ridley was saying, that when you start talking to them about art, politics, life, childhood, and suddenly there's some connection, and they understand the character deep in their own experience, then you got it. So, I mean, it's very hard to fail there. If they are disconnected through that, then you have a problem. Because if you intellectualize a character, it's not that they have to kill somebody in the real life to be an assassin in the film. It's not that. But it's about rage or about things that you have to know that they own that. As a very funny anecdote, I remember that I have one guy in Babel, for example. In Babel, all the people in Morocco, they were not actors. They were from very humble village. But I have one guy that has an incredible face that in some moment, it was an old Moroccan guy, and he has to cry in some moment that the police arrive and start questioning about it, looking for who sold him the rifle. And he has an incredible face, but I never went through, because I didn't spoke that language, I didn't have the time to work with that specific person, and I work with all the others but not him. And in the moment that he hasn't had one memory in his life that made him cry. And I remember we spent 2 days trying to get him something. He was the most happy guy in his life. Said, have you fight with your mother? No. But the face that he has a face of like the most terrifying Arab guy, and when he smiled, he was like that, and he didn't have any of that, and it was my fault. And suddenly with Hiam Abbas, a great actress that was my translator, she and I start working with him, and she suddenly find that, and suddenly after 2 hours in the desert there, he realized that when he buried her mother, she was not there when the brothers, and he was not there. And that happened 20 years ago. And the cry hadn't cried in many years. So he started crying. And when he started crying, he couldn't stop. So there was a 60-year-old man crying for the first time in 20 years by a memory that was triggered by, and camera. So I shot 2 takes. And then he couldn't stop crying for 6 hours. And I was holding, and I started crying. I felt like shit. So I'm talking about the radical process of casting, that sometimes you commit mistakes, but I learned that lesson from that guy.
Got it.
And that I always have to know that they have that baggage. And finally, I have to say that I think in casting, I think there's that, like the energies are very important too, not only the craft, because sometimes the craft is important, but it's about energies, emotional baggage, truthness. And then is the big question, like the big question of what the film is about, then the middle questions about who is with who and blah, blah. And then obviously you find a lot of answers as you are doing. I think the intellectualization and notion is very different from the thing. As when you mentioned Sidney Lumet, his book is another masterpiece of filmmaking. Because sometimes you have the theory of, I have Ludwig Mariuli's theory, but then I have Judith Weston pragmatisch, how pragmatic. So I think with the actors it's the same. You go to talk about the characters and all that thing, but then how really you do one thing with the camera and really with just a piece of silence you will convey something. That's not theory. That's an execution. But you find it,
Were there parts here that were challenges for you to find? For example, Hawk or Bridges. I'm using those two.
Very. All the Native Americans were really difficult in this film because something that bothers me, sometimes Native Americans has been portrayed, as we know, very badly. Or they are demonized or they are sanctified, right? They are the nice, pure culture, or they are the savage, horrible. And I, in my country, for example, every time that somebody comes and do a film about the indigenous people, is the same. So it's like the bipolar image of people that is as complicated and complex and contradict as us. So they are not good or bad. They are everything as we are. So I want to portray that with people understand. And sometimes I found that the Native Americans, the people that were available, they were always like with the six-pack here, like that, and long hair, like very kind of... they didn't feel like real people from that period. They feel like models or something, that even the bodybuilding was different. I mean, I never imagined that. And by seeing a lot of, lithographs and paintings, I knew that I wanted a type. So it was difficult to find like real people that would make me feel that they were true to what I was looking. So I have worked all my life with Francine Maidler, the casting director. We opened casting in Canada, in all the United States, in many states. And we taped hundreds of people around different states.
And were they taped with a scene? How did you tape?
Or just first, my process is first just, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. Then when you know that there's something that physically is good, then you go to the next tape. And then you have... something that I do now often that I discovered with the film in 21 Grams, I ask people to just record 5 minutes of their lives and talk about them. And when I have cast secondary roles like that, because people, when they start talking about their lives in 5-minute tapes, I'm so moved, or I'm so impacted, or suddenly I like their voice or the way they move, or there's something, the gravity of it, and I think it's intuition.
By the way, now I'm going to be very specific. In these tapes, are they headshots? Are they body?
They tape themselves in their houses. So I'm sitting, tape, hi, my name is Alejandro, I born in Mexico. So they start talking, and by some reason, they start going into some things that were what defined them, and if they allow themselves to be real. Real, not that they are manipulating me, but there's some kind of truthness that when you sit with some person, you like it or not. And so nobody can teach you that. Nobody can teach you where to put the camera here or how long a shot will be. Those things, I think that nobody can teach cinema to anybody. I mean, because the real cinema comes from this intuitive thing. Is to shoot the film is very easy, but how long a shot should be, if the camera is here or maybe 3 feet longer, or if the angle is here. So those things is right.
I want to get you back to
no. But what I'm saying is about the faces. Is if you ask me how I get to the cast, is why you choose this guy, and sometimes it looks absolutely wrong, but it's because nobody teaches you that. And in this case, for example, the Pawnee Native American that saved Leo and that in the sweat lodge, right. That character that eat buffalo with him. This guy basically is a driver in Texas of a truck driver that goes around Texas getting oil to the gas stations. He's not an actor. He has never been. It's just his energy, his smile, his vibe, his connection with nature. Even when he's an oil truck driver, he's so connected with his culture, the dignity that he expelled, the happiness. There was something that I said, this guy is healing me. This guy will heal this guy. So It was a
But
very
there's
risky choice.
There's the tape. Did you meet him before you cast him?
Yes, of course.
And what happens in that meeting?
In that meeting, he told me stories that I was incredibly moved. Or even Elk Dog, the guy that the enemy, the guy that is looking for her daughter. This guy, has an incredible life of a man that he has this face and he has a tough life. In 21 years, he was completely in the streets and lost in addictions. And now he has been for 25 years helping kids in the streets of Canada getting out of drugs and things. So he's he's a pure guy so those should be like wrong choices. Physically we're right, risky ones. I was glad that I did it, but it's much more intuition and a personal, and I was lucky to have all these guys.
When you talk to them, do you ever, in like these two cases, did you ever have them, because this is interesting what you said, Ridley, did you ever have them read something? Would they, at that moment when they're face to face with you, you've met them, you saw them tape, you like them, now they're meeting you and you're in a conversation, do you ever ask them to read something, perform something?
Yes, I did. I read with them. I taped it myself in my office. Forrest Goodluck, for example, the kid, the son of Leo, he has never acted. He's a 15, 16-year-old kid. He's super smart, but he was intimidated as hell, and I think we worked like 4 months with an acting coach, Angela Gibbs, who helped me a lot. And we worked with him months and months and months and training and doing exercise. And I did.
But you made a commitment to have him do it.
Yes. Because I knew that there was nobody like him physically and committed. There was something that I saw so many kids around United, and they were very shy. And some of them, they have been so beaten culturally that they are very, very, the self-esteem is not there. And this kid, he was so dignified and so willing to, and even when he has a lot of flaws, his voice, his intention, he didn't know nothing about acting. He was paralyzed. And working and objectives. Let's do this. And I was doing rehearsing with him about emotions, this and that. And then through a huge amount of work, and then Leo helped me to get him confidence. And Leo, like a godfather, embraced him and give him confidence. So I was lucky to have in Calgary many times with all the actors to rehearse all the scenes with all of them to make this happen. So it was a very extraordinary process and very privileged process. And
cool.
But it was like that.
Thank you. Tom, there are some very powerful performances that sometimes people are in one scene, like Father Paquin, when you knock on the door and we suddenly meet this man. How do you go about the process of casting? Being an actor yourself, if I remember correctly, this is something you know. So, and you've been in that position. What's your process of casting?
I think they're all similar in some way, right? I will say it's a part of the process, coming up as an actor, that I really enjoy. I think it's as we all know, being a director, there's so many facets to the job. That particular facet, I take a lot of joy. And I never, it's interesting you were talking about the pressure and stuff, Alejandro, because I never feel that, because I think I'm just so, now I probably will, and you ruined it for me, so thank you. Now that I know, I can screw everything up. I never knew that before. Damn it, I shouldn't have done this panel. But there's, I think, having been in that room, and Ridley said this, and it's true, that the rehearsal room is in no way conducive to anything creative, even with very experienced actors. I've seen some wonderful actors come in and just push or sell or try too hard or just be uncomfortable or just not want to be there, and it's understandable. So I think part of the job is making that room much more of a discussion and a dialogue about character than it is a test or an audition. And I think that's tricky. I think, one thing, having come up as an actor, I had a chance to work with a lot of very good directors and watch the different processes, and some not so good. See some where I thought, well, that's not helpful to me, how he gave direction, and that is, or, whoever that is. And someone mentioned Clint earlier, and I worked with him once, and he really is one take. And it's terrifying, and he's like, I was like, you sure I got that? He's like, yeah, I'm sure. And walked away. And I'm like, all right. And I don't think his DP liked it very much either. DP's like, double check the gate, triple check the gate. But that's Clint, But I feel like specifically with this film, it was the largest cast I've ever had. And it was, look, that first, the top of the bench, right? My first 8 or 10 people on the call sheet are incredibly experienced actors, right? have worked collectively quite a bit, and I felt very safe where I was with that casting. But then a lot of it was all these people who come in for 1 or 2 scenes. Richard O'Rourke is that actor, is a local Boston actor. It's a terrific example. Just something about his look, his face, where I believe this guy could possibly be a priest at one time and could possibly, it sounds horrible, but done bad things. I could hear myself saying it. I was on the train. Full disclosure, I was in The Wire in the 5th season as, you know, in some ways one of the most hated characters. I was this weaselly white guy. There was nothing cool about me, and I was a really bad journalist. And I remember David Simon called me when I was editing The Visitor, and he said, "I've got this part. I think you're perfect for it." But I didn't know what it was because he never shows you until the next episode. And at first I'm like, this guy's cool. And then halfway through I'm like, I'm the biggest dick on the show. And I was. Everyone hated me. So I guess he saw something in my character that was weaselly. So I saw something in Richard. But you know, with these people, it was
But
really.
what's the process? Are you meeting them?
I
Are
just
you
bring them
talking
in.
to
Yeah, I would just go. I'm still with this. I feel like I really had to be in the room because a lot of these guys weren't
And
experienced.
who else is in the room with you?
This time, sometimes my co-writer Josh Singer, just because he was really involved and really wanted to be, and he hadn't been, and I'm pretty open that way. But I don't have a lot of people. I rarely have producers or anyone else in the room. It's got to be as simple as possible when people come in. And there was another guy, Jimmy LeBlanc, who plays Patrick McSorley.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, he's one of the survivors, and who has the tracks on his arm, and an amazing scene with Stanley and Mark Ruffalo. And that guy, he's been in a few of Ben's movies in Boston, but like really small, almost extra roles. But he hasn't done anything. He's like a working member of the Sheet Metals Union.
I want to say something because I think that what is fantastic about your film too is not only the main caster, but all these victims, all these guys.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes that what make a film much more powerful is not the principal, but the secondary, or even the guy that has one line can define the whole film, and that's where the film really. And I think in your film is especially true in those characters that just come in and go out for one scene, but it gives the gravitas. I was really impressed about that cast as well.
Now, when they come in, because let's discover what your process is. Here's this actor who played Patrick.
Yeah.
Coming in, do you engage in conversation? Do you actually have him read?
Just
Do
talk
you
to
read
him.
with him?
He was particularly tough. That's why I brought him up, because he was just a tough guy. He's from Southie. He knows, as we talked later, he knows those people. In fact, I rehearse. I always rehearse for at least a couple of weeks. This cast was hard to get together because they were so big and they all work so damn much. They're hard, but we finally got together in New York. And I brought him in one day, and it was him and Tucci and Mark Ruffalo, and Keaton was there. And he just came in and was kind of ice and was like really into it, you know, and was good. And I could tell he'd never been in a rehearsal room. I could just tell that he didn't know what was going on, what we were doing. We sat down, but he handled himself really well. And I kind of walked him out afterwards. That was really good. It's first step. We're not about getting there yet. My rehearsals aren't about performance. They're just about getting everyone on the same page, developing a dialogue. You know, with this particular movie, really understanding material, which he did. He knew people that were abused. He knew the priests. He knew the parishes. He came from that community. It's a really small community. So he was like really helpful. But I remember I was walking him out, and I was like, that was great. He's like, yeah. And I was like, you cool? Because you seem really comfortable. You're not freaked out by these guys? And he just stops. He goes, of course I'm freaked out. That was the Hulk and Batman and that guy from... He's like, the best was he goes, the Hulk and Batman and that guy from The Devils Wear Prada, which I thought was like amazing. But he covered, and he was tough, but he had his own journey.
I want to go back a bit. What made you decide to cast him? And again,
Really, because what I needed in this film, and this was a big point of debate production-wise, because we split our production between Boston and Toronto. And this was something I was really, really fighting against, because Boston is the movie. And we were at the point where we were not going to make the movie. Sometime you got to teach me how to get more money, because I'm not that good at it. And I was going to pull the plug. So I was just getting to a point where I had days, and it was just I wasn't going to make this movie. It was too important to me. And my line producer, Michael Biederman, really saved the film by figuring out, he just broke it all down. He's like, look, we shoot everything in Boston that we need to, and we just go build one set in Toronto, the newsroom and the spotlight office. We can't shoot that in Boston anyway, so who cares if we're in Brockton or Toronto? And we can make it work, and we'll come back seasonally. My one caveat to that was, okay, any actor that has one line that I need has got to come from Boston and from the community. Now, look, there's some amazing, as I found later, and I relented because I found a few, there's some amazing actors in Toronto because it's such a shop town, right? And you've got this culture of character actors who come in and give you great performances. But I needed these actors to come up. For instance, the woman at the front desk at the Globe, who's got one scene at the end of the movie where she says, great article, boys. He comes in and she says, the phones haven't rang all day. You know, Marty sent two of mine down to Spotlight. And she just had this voice and this face and was from there. And I was like, I got to have her, you know. And so I brought her up. And that was really tricky. You know, that's what I needed, people who would really bring that level of authenticity to this culture. Keep in mind, I got lucky with the reporters. I didn't have to have a lot of actors do those accents because of, one, it's an incredibly tricky accent to get right? We know that. And the reason is it's so varied. But as it turns out, Resendez wasn't really from Boston. You know, Sasha wasn't really from Boston. They all ended up there very early in their lives, but they didn't have that.
The character that's Steve, the other...
Yeah, so Rachel's character and Ruffalo's character, they didn't have to do it. And with Robbie in that accent, with Michael was really concerned about. He did some great work with this dialect coach, Steve Gabus, out of New York. Terrific.
I want to still jump in one more time.
Why, are you saying I'm going off track?
No. You're doing just fine. You do not have to panic, Dustin. You're doing good. You're doing just fine. My question is, like, for example, when someone like who played Nana comes in,
yeah,
and it's a spectacular moment when she asks for a glass of water.
Yeah, it's the one moment in the movie where I get emotional when I see it, and I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think because she feels like a lot of my family that I grew up with, and that Nana was another woman who we just found. She'd never acted a day in her life. She's the woman in the scene who asked Rachel for a glass of water.
And how did you find her?
They're having, what'd you say?
No, how did you find her? You said you never acted.
Am I having fun? I was like, yeah, I am. Thanks for checking in. I'm just starting to have fun.
Good.
We just auditioned, and she came in, and she's a great example. We were shooting in this tiny house that we found. It was really, it's one of those scenes that we should have been in and out in 20 minutes because the scene's so simple. But it was so small that no crew member could move, and so it took like 9 hours. And we're all like, where the hell is the day going, And it was so frustrating, and it was a big moment for Rachel. And literally 5 minutes before Nana gave that great reading of that line, can I have a glass of water? She just was like watching it all and getting tired and getting cranky. And she just finally looked at me and she was just like, this is the silliest thing I've ever done, And I was just like, oh, that's not helpful right now. Poor Rachel's like locked down and, but then I had to sit there and talk to her and kind of get her into that place. And I started talking, literally in that instance, I started talking about the story. I started talking about, because she read every article, everyone in Boston did. As a lot of the older people we talked to, it was their TV. They would wait for that Globe to arrive, they would get their coffee, and they would read, and they would be absolutely gutted and horrified. And she remembered that, and she started talking about her own stories. And then we were ready to roll, she was there.
And when you were in the casting session with her, did she read for you? Did you just talk to her?
She did, and she wasn't great. I think it's a little bit what Alejandro's saying. There just comes a time where you're like, I'm not going to get any better than this. And that's a combination of face and spirit and voice and authenticity. And I can make this work. And as a director, that's our job sometimes, to figure out a way to make it work. And I think with her, I just, in my gut, I thought I would get her there.
Were there any other parts that were challenges for you?
Casting-wise?
Yeah, casting.
Just that it was relentless. It was the biggest cast I've ever had. So it was the first time I wasn't done casting by the time I started a movie. I'm always done casting by that point.
What was that experience?
And I would have to go home and cast. It was horrible because you're exhausted and you're trying to look at tape, or you're going into meetings on weekends, and you really want to be done, but there was just so much we could do at a time, and the cast was quite large. It was a really large ensemble, a lot of 1 and 2 scene roles, and so that was going on, and that was a struggle. But beyond that, I think it was really just marrying and making sure these people, and I really have to compliment my actors. These guys are pros, and they know they're only as good as the people they're in the scene with. So there was no ego on the set. There was none of that. It was a real kind of blue collar, let's tell this story because it's important kind of mentality. And they know if Jimmy LeBlanc's only as good as they are, and they're only as good as Jimmy is. And, the pros get that.
Got it. Adam, you had also a large cast. What's your process, particularly after you've got your stars, what's your process of dealing with the other parts?
Well, yeah, we had our big names, obviously, that were sort of at the center of the studio green lighting the movie when you have Christian Bale and Ryan Gosling and these people. I always, even with those people, I have to meet with them beforehand because I work in an unusual way. So I have to make sure they're going to be okay with it. And basically what I do is I almost am like two directors when it comes to doing a scene. And even in the audition, the first part I'll be like David Mamet, where you better fucking say every single word I wrote. And I want to hear the scene exactly the way it was written. And then halfway through the audition, I completely shift and I become like Del Close. And suddenly it's, don't do anything I wrote. What would you do? Let's mess around with it. Let's try this. And so with people like Christian Bale, he's obviously not auditioning, but I wanted him to know we had a conversation about it. Like, I'm going to do this. We're going to do the as written. We're going to get it. And then I'm going to completely pull the script out from underneath you, and we're going to just mess around. And I'm going to throw stuff out at you from behind the camera. Are you okay with that? And fortunately, they all were. So when you're auditioning roles like, a great example is John Magero and Finn Wittrock play the kind of young guys in the movie, Jamie and Charlie. And they're really good actors. And they came in and they read the script perfectly. And I said, I want both of them. So I got both of them in the room. And I just started having them do scenes that aren't in the movie. I just said, let's do the scene before this scene. Before you guys decide to go into that big bank to see if you can get in. I want to see you walking in and how excited you are that this is your big chance. And they kind of looked at me like, what? And then they just did it. So what I'm always looking for is like, on our best days, we're right about 80% of the time. Like the best day I've ever had, I was right 80% of the time. So you want to make sure when you show up on that set and you've planned everything and you've written everything and the wardrobe's there and the lighting's there and everything's perfect, there's always something just different in the air that you didn't anticipate. And I want to make sure the actors I have can go with that if there's something interesting happening. And there are some brilliant actors out there who can read scripts up and down and are just amazing. And I've bumped into a few of them, but when you take them off that script, they freeze a little bit. And I don't blame them if you're not comfortable with that. The best example I ever had with that was Richard Jenkins, who I love. I needed him to play a character in Step Brothers, actually. And it's a pretty wild character. It's one of the craziest movies we ever made. So I needed a guy who had authority, yet could completely go off the script. And Jenkins is a guy who did experimental theater in the 1960s. He has that authority. He's an amazing guy. You've worked with him, Tom. He's the best. So there's a scene at the end of the movie where he's talking to John C. Reilly and Will Ferrell, and he's giving him the moral of the movie. And I'm behind the camera, and I just go, Richard, tell him something about how when you were a kid, you pretended to be a dinosaur, but you had to give that up. And Richard goes, what? And I go, something like when I was a little kid, I used to pretend to be a Tyrannosaurus Rex and I would chase dogs and cats around the neighborhood. But I grew up and now I can't do my dinosaur anymore. Don't lose your dinosaur. And he's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. It's just film. It doesn't matter. Just go. And so he did a take and it was pretty good. I go, Richard, there's something there. And he's like, all right. And we did one more take and it was great. And then at the premiere, he walks up to me and he goes, please tell me you did not use that dinosaur speech. And it got applause. It's one of the lines in the movie that's quoted the most. And so we had that. I didn't do as much improv with The Big Short, but there's a lot of key moments that came out of that where, for instance, Brad Pitt is on the phone with Jamie and Charlie. And once again, I told them after 3 or 4 takes where we've got the script, I said, let's mess around. Anything you want to try? And in one take, Brad just said, all right, I got to get going. I have to go get a colonic. And Finn Wittrock just outright broke. And God bless my editor, Hank Corwin, put the break in the movie. And it just feels so real. So you get these mistakes and overlaps out of it. Yet at the same time, you want to be Mamet. You want to be hard about the script,
You've picked up a subject that I actually want to deal with, which is, in fact, the issue of what I'm going to call the happy accident. So I want you all to talk about the idea of the happy accident, meaning that we've planned everything, But there's another element that happens. But before you go there, I want to go back to the casting session one more time with you.
Sure.
What parts were challenges for you to cast? For example, the guy who plays the Chow in the scene we just saw, was he a difficult part to find?
The Byron Man you're talking about? Yeah, we read a lot of people for that. I like Alejandro, had the great benefit of having Francine Mazer, who's like the best casting director ever. So like anyone she brings you is in the ballpark of they could do the role. So we read a lot of people for that role because you didn't want him to be too arch. You just wanted him to be comfortable.
And when you say read, I want to just back off. Are you now seeing tapes that have been made that you're seeing, or are these people coming into your office?
Mix. She's showing me tapes. Do you want to bring this person in? I'm saying no, yes, no. I also, by the way, told Francine, under the premise of on our best day, we're right 80% of the time, I said, you can overrule me. And one of the people she showed me was John Magero, who was in that David Chase movie. And I liked him. He's a really good actor. But I thought, oh, he's not right for Charlie. And she went, I overruled you. I had him come in and read. And then sure enough, she was right. He was amazing. Right. And so the only thing I always say is don't overrule me too much. But you get there's a couple times you can do it. And
so for this part.
So in the case of Byron Mann, yeah, that was a guy. We probably read like 11 people for that role. It's one of the harder ones. But I thought the local casting is the biggest challenge.
I got that. What made you make the decision?
He played it. The real guy, Wing Chao is a real guy, and these people had no idea. There's actually a social dynamic for it. There's actually a psychological name for it, like Kahneman and Tversky talk about it, where people will justify their own good fortune no matter what. So you can go up to a random person and give them $10 million, and 2 weeks later, they'll be like, I always knew this was going to happen. I'm just that kind of guy. And a lot of Wall Street has that. And with all due respect to any Wall Street people. But actually, no respect to any Wall Street people. Fuck them. So I wanted Byron Mann to have that going on. I didn't want him to in any way think he was the villain. I didn't want him to in any way think he was evil, doing anything wrong. He was a guy who figured it out. The real guy went from making $110,000 a year to $20 million a year in 1 year. And it was all because of this fraudulent security system that was going on, these derivatives. And Byron played it like a guy who was on top of the world. Like if you changed that scene and said, Carell's a crazy man, Byron Mann's a hero, you could watch it again and Byron's smugness becomes like, what are you talking about? Like, and I really wanted that.
And you saw it in the room in the casting?
I saw it in the room in the casting, and then when he got on the set, Carell just walked up to me and goes, great fucking casting. This guy's perfect.
All right, let's talk about this idea of happy accidents. Ridley, looking at a movie like this where you're literally creating a world that does not exist, are there any room for happy accidents, or in fact, is that also part of the process?
It's experience. I have no happy accidents. I'm usually so well planned. It's dead easy. Sorry, that's the truth. Martian have done 72 days, and I am so prepped because I've made it in my head before I get there. Right. That's why I also adopt a minimum of 4 to 11 cameras, because I know how to use them. They'll never be wasted. And so in most of the time, there were 4 cameras, even with Matt by himself in whatever he was in, because, if there's a flub, a happy flub, and if I'm doing a two-hander, and I want, in that two-hander, I get an accident in dialogue, and most of you'll say cut, I just let it run. And because if you've got 2 smart actors, they're going to use the process, because the flub can be frequently something is really better than you had planned. If you're captured, you're already run. Just let it run. So that's why I was working 2 cameras, 2 and 2, and all that bullshit about, eyeline, all that crap's absolute nonsense. And actually, to light it is absolute nonsense. You can light everything with 4 cameras. And so I always have...
Say that louder. There's some cameramen in the balance.
Yeah. I'll repeat it. It's bullshit. Okay. So I'm not going to lecture you about how you avoid eye lines and all that stuff, because it's absolute nonsense. And actually, when you get into the real editing process, you barely notice. And the danger about what we do for a living, we can study our navel too long, too often. And that's, I think, speed is very interesting, because I used to think that actors like to have, when I very first began live television, I had very few years of live television, 4 years at BBC, 2 of that at Rediffusion, where I was learning to use 6 cameras on a live drama. So you're doing outside broadcast fundamentally with live drama. And the first show I did was like for this thing called Z-Cars, movie, Softly, Softly. The audience would have 13 million people at night. You have a day rehearsal, you hit it that night, you're live, you're on the air. And that's where I learned to use 6 cameras, I think, because you'd see them all moving. And woe betide you if you look at the 6 cameras while you're trying to concentrate on transmission. You just got to watch transmission. Everything else is this morass of movement, changing gear, changing lenses, focusing. If you ever looked at that, you have a panic attack. So I just learned to drive the bus this way. It's like driving a 747. So I learned to literally think geometrically. So, and every scene has a geometry. So when I'm reading or even prepping, I'm actually reading the geometry in the scene, right down to close-up, here, wide, medium thing. I just got that as part of my DNA. So when I go on, I know I'm going to be a minimum of 4 cameras. I'll get them in somehow without getting in the way of the actors. It means I'll get it quick. If there's an accident, which I like, I'll have captured it. And then you move on. Way back when, I used to assume an actor would want as many takes as he possibly could. And I learned later that they don't want that. It's like in a casting session, you come in, and I learned this at BBC, and at BBC, I was a young director. I grew a beard because I looked like 12 years old, and no one was actually taking me seriously. And I brought this very good actress in, but whether the guy was the window cleaner or a very good actor, very good actress, I felt I owed the respect of telling him the entire story. And so my casting sessions went on endlessly, and I remember being very embarrassed and intimidated by having this very beautiful actress in. Well, I'm going to tell her she's been doing 2 scenes, and I said, and then I looked up and she's doing this. She's going, and ever since then, I now keep it simple and keep it short, and so it's
there's a wonderful moment when he's leaving finally to, I guess, go to the MAV and the last thing, and he actually forgets his helmet, and it played so well, at least for me, that I actually thought, I wonder if
not in the script. You just love those things.
That's one of the examples that I'm saying. How did that one evolve? Because if you
I just say, I watch him and say, you know what? If you've ever driven down you're in a foreign country. You normally drive on, what do we drive on the right here? You drive on the right. Where are we driving on the right here?
They drive on the left.
Yeah.
That's to the two of you.
I'm
not sure what Mexico does.
And you stop, and you have a picnic or something.
Right.
You pull out, and you're on the wrong side of the road. So you think, the fuck's this guy flashing his lights at me? You're actually on the wrong side of the road. So I always remember that process.
So
happy accident. This is one big happy accident. There's so many scenes in the Martian with Matt by himself where he has to emote anger. Humor with him is very easy, but the emotional stuff where it's got to be real, that's the trickiest stuff. And you can only just weep just so many times, and you can only astronauts don't cry. Okay, right. And big men don't cry. Sorry, they don't. And so you can only have that happen once. It's more than once you think, wait a minute, he's a bit of a wimp. Okay, so we've talked it through. And with Matt, he's wonderful, both technician, intuitive, writer, everything. So you can literally sit down and block the geometry, the emotional geometry of the scene. While I'm here, do it in day and a half, a day. How much here? Not much. Oh, how much there? That one. Okay. So you have it blocked. So we've agreed the geometry of emotion. So I'm getting to this point now. And we tried one in the vehicle, and afterwards he said, didn't like that. He said, no, I didn't, that was not right. So I know where it has to be, the logical place has to be, and if you talk about it, the chances are they won't pull it off. Mm-hmm. You don't want to talk about it too much. So I got the sound man on one side to cobble together NASA talking to the crew, talking to the Jessica Chastain, who was the captain, talking to the talkback between all of them and NASA, who are now communicating. And they are going to, the moment is now literally, if it goes wrong, he will die. He will simply not get on that ship and he'll pass on into space forever. So it's takeoff point, where he's got to now take off. Problem is, he's no longer in the hands of himself. He's allowed himself to be disconnected to Michael Pena, who is the pilot up there, who is now guiding and pressing the button for takeoff. And then they will catch him, right? And I figured, this is it. And I didn't tell him. I had this great, funny old sound mix of lots of many voices all talking at once. In you know, it sounds like good NASA stuff and good pilot stuff, good right stuff, right? And Jessica was a great pilot, cool pilot, bloody hell. And she then said to him, how do you feel down there? And he suddenly, I saw tears, and holy shit, he started to blub on camera, and I could see him fighting it like crazy, and it was terrific. It was marvelous. And I said, let it run. And I went downstairs to him, and he said, I'm really sorry I lost it there. I said, when I heard those voices, I just filled up. Shall we do it again? I said, we got it. And we'll do it again. So we do it again. And he looked at it, and he said, no, you're absolutely right. That's the right moment there. And right that you want cameras, 4 cameras on top profile, every which way you got it.
So the accident was not an accident, really. You prepped it.
No, it was not. No, I'd always put it in. Always put it in. Other accidents are if I blow blood with pipes on a set, I'm going to bring this nasty little son of a bitch out of somebody's chest. It's going to be wiped out the set. It'll take a week to wipe it down because raspberry blood tends not to wipe off easily. And so that's why I applied 5 cameras. So that was one shot.
Got it.
So 5 cameras on them. I had a hose on Veronica Cartwright to shut her up because what I'm going to hit her with blood. She went over the back of the sofa. But to have that one take, and if I didn't get it in one, I'd have to clean up and come back 5 days later.
Got it.
That was it.
So then you were blessed in that sense. That's having the blessing of it.
Yeah, but happy actions is kind of guiding. You got to your intuition tell you this could happen.
Yep.
If it does happen, I want to get it.
Got it.
Is it true you didn't tell the actors what was going to happen?
I wouldn't show it to them.
Okay.
So, because I knew they'd laugh. To see that, the pistol grip in the guy's hand, they just roar with laughter and I'm finished. So the guy, I put him under the table, lying in John Hurt's lap, because John Hurt's lying on the table like that, bent down. And I'm lying on the table, giving him white wine to keep him calm. And he's like that. I've now screwed a plastic chest on him, and they are already action. And then boom, and the T-shirt didn't go. So sort of cut, get out the set, and I had to lie on the table and razor blade the T-shirt again, come back. Because they started bursting out laughing because the thing wouldn't come out.
Got it. There's a happy accident.
When it did come out, that was good.
George, happy accidents, particularly on this film, which is an incredibly designed film.
Well,
and you don't want any accidents.
I'm sitting, yeah, exactly. You don't want unhappy accidents, but in this case, it was very carefully designed. I mean, it looks like a chaotic film, but we had to really prepare. In terms of performance, there's subtle little things. I mean, what's really interesting about this movie, it was very noisy on set. A lot of it was on the move. So there's very little opportunity to go in there and do notes. Often I was remote. We did have some sort of speaker in there. It was just, they could barely hear me say action or cut. But the one thing we did do was, if we were on a run, and we might have several miles to travel, we would do, providing we could go back to the first position, as it were. I mean, the actors could regroup. There was no event that stopped us doing another take. We'd just say, let's go again, and then we'd look at it. And by then, I mean, this was an atypical movie, because no sooner are you saying action than you're yelling cut, because it's made up of little pieces. But I'm trying to think of moments. There are moments of performance and so on, but they're very, very subtle. You know, there are other movies that come to mind where you're always looking for that.
Because of the nature of this movie, then, in order to be able to actually make it, I heard you had literally thousands of storyboards in order to be able to put this into...
Well, there were 3,500 storyboards, but that's panels.
Right.
But that was the first iteration of the movie. The whole exercise with this movie was to make basically a silent movie with sound.
Right.
And the best way to render that was to do it as storyboards. So...
did you end up prevising those storyboards as well?
No. We can't previs real world stuff as well. But we did previs a storm sequence, simply to see how that would go. But for the rest of it, we didn't. The storyboards were a document on which to build the production. That was the main thing. And it's way, way easier to describe the spatial relationships of the characters and the vehicles and so on and so on. So that was a really, really useful tool.
And how did you work with your storyboard artists? Did you give them something? I don't know if you sketch something or do something beforehand, or did you say, this is the nature of this scene, solve these problems? How did you work with them?
Well, I worked with... I wrote the initial version with Brendan McCarthy, who's a wonderful, I don't know if you know him, but a wonderful Irish graphic novelist. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very fine artist. And then we kind of almost dictated it and wrote it out knowing where we were to go. And then we sat in this room with whiteboards and we draw on the whiteboards. I used to do a lot of drawing and painting, but I was nowhere near his caliber, and I also worked with two other storyboard artists I've worked with, Peter Pound and Mark Sexton. And we basically sat and went shot for shot, scene for scene, exploring it. And what was really interesting too is that a lot of the designs were being done. So I'd work with one storyboard artist. I'd often get up and do a very, very rough scribble, and we'd talk about it, and I'd do a series of panels, but my version. They'd look at it, we'd talk about it, we'd say, okay, let's do that, and one of them would take it off and render them at a much better level.
The Attack of the Buzzards, those ones with the porcupine things, if you were looking at that storyboard and the evolution of it, because it's a very complex sequence, and they're very complex, creatures, if you will, that you've got, that you devised. The creative process of the first version of that storyboard, and then really specifically say, well, we want to flip this here, or flip that there. If we were in that dialogue, what would be happening over a certain amount of time?
Well, mainly as we were interrogating the movie and looking at budget and so on, there might be trims here and there, we might adjust them. But what then happened is you then try to get out into the real world. And with the crew, they would go out and test some of these things. Everything was rehearsed. You have to do that with a stunt movie like this. Every vehicle roll was rehearsed with an alternate vehicle, a cheap version of it, because there has to be the precision to get in your cameras. And I've never used so many cameras as in this movie, so now you're putting the storyboards aside and testing it against the real world, and that becomes, that takes primacy.
And these tests were with cameras, so I assume. So would you, when you were testing, let's say a roll, would you have 3 or 4 cameras on the test in order to see?
Yeah. They might be just cheap GoPros sometimes, right. But yeah, everything was tested that way. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Wow. Alejandro, any accidents, happy accidents in the making of this? And I know there must have been because of the way you make these things.
The film itself is an accident. It just happened by an accident. We were just walking in the woods and suddenly a bear came and shoot him! It was a happy one. We came alive. No, I have to say that there's like a very contradictory thing that I learned from this film because it's a unique film and I learned a lot from it, and learning by preparing a lot, I think, as Ridley and George did. I think these kind of films, when you are in these huge landscapes, which I have never done in my life, by the way. I have never had I hate green, I hate trees. And in none of my films you will see one tree. I hate them. Always I cut them. And now I was surrounded by trees. I was shocked. I was like, how I shoot a tree? And it's so difficult to shoot trees and horses. And so it was for me a learning process. This film has to be extremely well prepared, like nothing I have done, because it requires, conceptually, I wanted to make it the way it's done, which is basically with long shots that I, in a way, learned from Birdman. But in Birdman, I was completely in control situation in corridors and theaters, and it was very, very much about dialogue base and things like that. Here, it was a completely different animal that, thanks to the great preparation and time that we have with Scott Robertson and James Kochtopol, that we really share a lot of time with Chivo Lubeski and trying to find the best way. So I started scouting location this film 5 years ago. So every locations I knew that it will have to be the site to serve a purpose, which will be, I knew that we will have to shoot in natural light, and every location not has to be used right, but with the right light direction, and it will be used for 1 hour and a half. And I, differently from George and Ridley, I decided to shoot just with one camera and one take and long take. So that for me was very extremely kind of terrifying, because there are scenes that are action scenes that involve hundreds of people, and you want to capture what is important, and I wanted to have these epic sometimes moments that to see the landscape and the amount of what is in that, like the paintings of these things. But then if that is not related to an emotional point of view, then what is that about? So to choreograph all that, even when I was casting, I said to every actor how I'm going to be shooting this film, and they will have to be subordinate to a very precise and meticulous way. So it will not be the classic, what about if we try that? What about, no, because everything will have to be like clockwise, because we were shooting, I think I asked you, like 14 millimeters, sometimes 12 millimeters, that you are seeing 180 degrees. So there's nobody to hide. Everybody has to be around the camera. So in a way, everybody has to know in advance what to do. And because the film will start being shot in the fall, and we know that we will be shooting in winter and then deep winter, we have to prepare those landscapes 4 months before we start shooting, because the snow will come, so for the trucks to come in, to the horses to get in. So the logistics of this film and the way that the months of preparation was something that I have never experienced in my life. That was so difficult and so expensive in that sense. And honestly, without that preparation, we could have never shot the film the way we did, because when we arrived to these landscapes 4 months later, they were completely devastated, or they was completely different, or a flood has come, and all what we planned was, but we have the basics. So what I'm saying is that I didn't do storyboards, but I kind of did like a real-time previs with the camera and with the actors and the stunts first. So basically not storyboards, but with the camera, really there was a preconceived things when I did the scouting location, and then with a video camera to be just finding what is the point of view and structuring what every frame has to be told, and when to shift and when from this point we start with Leo and then we shift to
Now,
Tom.
you're doing this. You don't have Leo and Tom at this moment. You have stunt people and stand-ins for this particular.
Yes. First is just with the stunts and Doug Coleman, who was great in this, helped me to start to getting from here. I did a storyboard 5 years ago. I'm a terrible painter, but I just with my little things, I did something that I knew what was the anchor points of view of that battle that I want to shoot. So then with these stunts and sometimes I will say extras just to be understanding, we did the whole thing one by one with measured steps. Okay, now we pan here. Okay, now mark that. Okay, now from here discover that. Boom, that will be there. Then we go to the elk dog. Then the point of view shift to Tom. Then with this ghost time point of view. Then Captain Henry goes in. So we rehearse for days and sometimes weeks. And then you go to the next level. Okay, now let's see the action. Okay, now that. And then until the actors arrive. And then when the actors arrive, it was a pre-designed, very well planned for them to now get it into that. And that's tough for actors, I have to say, because then they are kind of, wrapped in a very, very pre-concept kind of thing.
Did you show them, by the way, these videos?
Not necessarily. I was just getting them. But I think that I felt that they knew. I think a good relation with actors is built on mutual trust. And they trust that I have been invested myself a lot. So in a way, once I think they feel that you have really done all that work, in a way, there can be a rebellion and said, what the fuck, I'm not like a slave, or I will not do that, because, or suddenly they get excited by it. And in this case, I was lucky that all these guys, suddenly we were playing like cowboys and Indian, and it was kind of, okay, now 2, 3, 4, okay, camera, boom, and it was incredibly precise. Every frame was a study, every movement from the background, everything was, so what I found that was, in terms of happy accidents, is that we prepare, and I'm talking about the big scene, but the same way it was prepared every single scene, every single one, And honestly, it's the first time, because all the films that I have done in a way are kind of, they have the genes of theater or literature based on that kind of thing. But here, taking out those elements from theater or literature where most of the film is silent to, is when suddenly cinema has another possibilities that I discovered that I was so fascinated, because it's when pure cinema, start going, and with very few things, just by picture, you have to show the story. And we were I was editing in the pre-production, everything, because we go from the face of this and then again here. So every single scene was rehearsed with meticulousness, like literally like that. So it was like to rehearse a theater play for months with that background of meticulousness and confidence that it gives you that, which is great. But no matter how prepared you are, as the best description of the filmmaking like this was, Kubrick said that it was like to try to write a poem when you are in a roller coaster. And it's exactly the same. You're trying to be very poetic, but then everything is collapsing around you. And no matter what, we were prepared for months. And then when we arrived, everything changed. The mood changed. The weather has impacted us. And then everything, what I thought was genius, is a piece of shit. And the camera movie is now not working and now doesn't make sense. And then you have to recreate things. The actors start getting their input and some kind of things, because they have learned from the characters things that now they are different persons, and we were 9 months there. So suddenly, like, I remember we did that, but fuck you, now I have a beer like that, I will do that, and I said, great. So suddenly, all that precision, right, with the confidence of the precision, you are exposed to the adrenaline that we were running out of light. And we knew that we have 40 minutes to go out, freezing everybody's asses, and everybody wants to go immediately out of there, and we have 1 or 2 takes. That's it. And when everybody knows that it's 1 or 2 takes, and that if we return to that will cost $500,000, everybody wants to go out. And so the panic of that puts you as an actor and as a director in an awareness and a state of mind that is like to be performing a theater play with the adrenaline that live performance, but with the confidence of knowing where to go to. So that combination of chaos and confidence of rehearsal, I found it fascinating, and I think it got a good result, what we learned about. I mean, it was something that I bring from Vermont, was similar, but this was in a massive, uncontrollable environment. And for example, one happy accident, I remember, happy accidents, for example, when the camera was, we always planned to go very close with these 14 millimeters to this super close-up because we want to integrate the landscape to the close-ups. But when the breath was happening in the cold and suddenly was impacted the lens, that was an accident. And I love it. And so she would look to me and suddenly the camera, and then I used that. It was an accident. And then, okay, cut in the editing room, you go to the cloud. So, or blood spilling in the lens, great. Or things like that. Or Leo wants to eat the famous raw liver that he eat. And he said, great. And he did it, and he started vomiting, and it's in the film. So it's an accident that he provoked by being brave and being true, and suddenly that vomit kind of cough. So, Aurora Boreal, we were shooting, and suddenly there was an Aurora Boreal in front of us, and and it's in the screen. So honestly, I think the accidents are the best part of this kind of process, but it's a combination of both things.
Well spoken indeed. Tom, happy accidents on your piece.
Jesus.
Now don't. Here's, I thought about this a lot.
Come on.
I really thought about this a lot because obviously the difference of the kinds of films that we have represented up here, come on, it's very clear. But the issue of casting, it's the same issue, whether you've got 50 people or 2 people. The issue of finding a location, it's the same issue. The issue, this too, about what kind of environment do you create and the possibility, how does an accident actually play into the film? And I'm interested in that because we try to control all of this.
Yes,
I love your fact that you said it when 80% that you were saying, Adam. And there's a point at which it's not in our control. And can we take advantage of, in fact, what isn't in our control? And can it feed the pieces that we're trying to make?
Yes, I accept that.
Good, I'm glad.
Still Jesus. That's incredible. It's incredible. It's an incredible piece of filmmaking. Genuinely. Yeah, in different ways. We had our, we really didn't have many accidents, honestly. I was been thinking for 3 people, and I'm like, nope, really not an accident. Just because maybe the controlled environments of the world that we were playing with, and of course, within performance and the parameters of what accidents are, yes, there's little pieces you grab. One thing maybe that was interesting was, there's probably 2 little moments that come to mind. One was, we were supposed to start shooting earlier, in September, and because of financing such a mess nowadays, they kept pushing us and not green lighting us, and so we couldn't get up and running. So our pre-production kept getting crunched, and what was more important is I had to have one scene in Fenway, and I really wanted the scene because I felt like it. Knowing Boston, it says a lot about Boston, and not just because it's an iconic landmark, but I think it specifically speaks to the tribalism of that community, the kind of the clannishness that sometimes can be wonderful and inclusive, and sometimes it can get very toxic and insidious. And I think that was the sort of dark and light of the film in many ways. So I really wanted to be in Fenway, and it got to the point where we had 2 games that we could shoot. And now it had to be the first scene of the film, and just because we were shooting that scene in a live game, which wasn't a great idea maybe, but it was the only way to really get it. And I say that because we didn't have the money to control massive sections. When I got there, I said to one of my producers, now how do we own all this? He's like, no, just that little circle in there. Those 2 guys, we don't know them. They seem nice, and it was like a nightmare. And I got some famous actors in the scene, and it took us 9 innings and a little more to get a page and a half, which we should have, again, been able to do very quickly. But what happened was, then we finally had the last day. It was going to be the 2nd or 3rd day in the shoot, which was good because I wanted my crew to get a chance to get up and running and get familiar with everyone. But we had to move it back because the Yankee organization, and I am a lifelong Yankee fan, would not let us shoot that scene with them playing in the game because of the subject matter. They felt like it wasn't appropriate for the Yankee organization. So big, I'm no longer a Yankee fan. So I'm open to any team that wants me. but we had to shoot it first, and it was a little overwhelming. And I think we literally just got the scene. I will say that it was the first day for my actors, Ruffalo, Slattery. They were finding things. Brian Darcy James' character, and it was just a little rough. And we would have people kept walking into the scene and would see, Mark Ruffalo, and one guy literally offered him a beer mid-scene. And Mark said, no, it's okay, because Mark's too nice. Said, no, it's okay, I'm just having O'Doul's. And the guys were like, O'Doul's, And then 3 innings later, when we were almost getting the scene, comes back through and goes, hey, Ruffalo, O'Doul's, And Masa Nobu, my cinematographer, who's just incredible, we were so far away, like peeking through, and he's just like, amazing, this is Boston. The accent, the happy part of it was, because it was a little bit of a fun, crazy nightmare night, was it gave everyone, and some of the other actors showed up for that scene, and the actual reporters were there. It really gave us a sense of Boston, of what we were doing. My wife showed up. She has not spent a lot of time in Boston, and she made her way through the crowd and got to me, and she's like, this is amazing, this city. I feel like I'm in the deep South. And I'm like, what do you mean? That's not ever how I think of Boston. She's like, it's just such a specific community, and it's so foreign to anything I know. And I thought, wow, that's a really important thing to remember when telling this story, that this community, one, that it is, and two, that we better get it right or it won't work. And so it turned out to be, in that way, not in the way of getting something on film, but in sense of inspiring the work we were doing, a really wonderful sort of baptism, if that's, I don't know if that's an inappropriate word for this particular movie, but like a baptism for the production,
There's a scene when Ruffalo goes and runs to get a cab. And the cab's on the street, and he sort of crosses the street. And I wondered about that moment. Obviously, you've planned it, but there was something about it that also felt immediate, spontaneous. The turn, the catch. What I'm talking about, maybe you knew he was going to go past him and he'd have to catch up. I have no idea what you actually were setting up, but
that was not an accident. That was just Mark being good. The only thing that was an accident about that is we had a stunt driver who wasn't good, and he got like 2 takes. And it's like one more take, and he goes, and he did one more take, and it stunk. And then so the captain had to do it. And the captain wasn't happy about it because he's the captain, and he was sort of not. It should have been an easy maneuver, so he did it. So that meant he had to drive the cab through the rest of that scene, which we shot over like the next couple of weeks, and he was not happy about that either. And he was really mad at his stunt guy. But that was a pretty basic and Mark acting. Great actors make those things look good.
That's the point. They do make it feel real. They feel that moment is true and it's not rehearsed.
Yeah, I think so. I think we rely on that. And, again, there's within this a million little happy accidents that happen and finding moments in production. But, we didn't have a big one like that.
Got it. Adam, clearly part of your work, if I understand as you were describing your style of directing, is in fact to create the possibility and atmosphere where something else is going to happen that you didn't plan on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think each story tells you how you need to approach it. I mean, there's certainly some other movies we've done that have action elements to it where we get more into what these guys were talking about with like previses and, you can't have accidents then because people get hurt. So in those cases, but we're always looking for sort of pockets where things go differently than you think they're going to go. I mean, what are there, like 32 different kinds of stories you can tell? So like, we're trying to always pretend that we're not telling that story so the audience doesn't know what's going to happen. In the case of The Big Short, it really called for it because these were guys who were outsiders. These were guys who were strange, who were flawed. In one case, one group found out about the deal literally through a wrong number. And these are guys who were bad in meetings, who had pit stains under their shirts, couldn't make eye contact. And so I wanted to go counter to the movies like, great movies like Margin Call and Wall Street, which were much more monolithic, and they showed marble buildings, and everyone was very well dressed, and that was the power side of it. And these guys were on the periphery of it. So right away, my first choice, I wanted accidents in this movie. I wanted discoveries, was to hire Barry Ackroyd, who is just the master of letting the scene happen without influencing it. And he shoots on long lenses, so the actors never know when they're getting their close-up or their medium or whatever. And he's always searching and playing. So constantly, every scene, there's discoveries where I'm running over and punching Barry in the arm and going, oh God, keep doing that, you know. And so the process of just shooting any scene becomes kind of a discovery/accident. And then what I would do is I would set traps in scenes. I would actually purposely set it up so that something would go wrong. And I would have people enter at the wrong points. And if I was doing off camera, I would always change the dialogue on the actor to throw them. And we wanted everything. We wanted people to talk over each other. It had to have this raggedy quality because these real guys were feeling so much anxiety and they were on such a roller coaster and they were excited. They were terrified. Some of them got physically ill. 2 of them experienced panic attacks for the first time in their lives. That's how horrible and stressful this was. So we wanted the whole movie to kind of be tripping over itself like that. So it had to be built into it. You know, there's a lot of examples of it. There are tons and tons of accidents. But, you know, the main thing I would do is I would just, you know, there's a scene where Carell comes into his office front point for the first time and just kind of busts in the door and starts talking about how his wife is giving him shit. And I just kept delaying his cue. And I kept telling the guys, you got to talk till he comes in. And sometimes I would do it for 10 seconds. Sometimes I'd let them go for a minute and a half. One time, I think Hamish Linklater even stopped and he's like, what's going on? Like, and I'm like, keep going, keep going. And sure enough, out of that came this great moment where Rafe Spall talks about having a swollen epididymis. And it ended up being this illustrated beat. And it showed how they all busted each other's balls. It gave each other a hard time. And it was completely improvised and discovered. So yeah, the whole method of this film was that I never called cut when I was supposed to call cut. I always went way longer. Always was having people enter, telling someone, go in there, tell them this, and trying to keep them off balance. And fortunately, we just had an amazing cast. I mean, actors who could all handle this, so it was okay.
Was your camera person operating as well?
The great thing with you mean Barry Ackroyd
Yes.
operates a camera, which is great. So he's actually, and God, is he amazing. And so, yeah, with him as the foundation, and I told him, we just had a progression, like start off, give me some basic coverage so I know I've got it. And then I would tell Barry, I was like, go to town, my friend, go to Impressionisticville. And he would start to just find different things. But the actors started to figure out they had no standard coverage. And it just created these great dynamics and performances that were going on. Trying to think of the craziest accident we had. One thing I wanted to do on this film, and I hadn't really done it this much before, and I'm sure some of you guys have done it, but I tried to use as much real background as possible. I just said, give me like 6 background people that we control. Let real New York walk by. Let real New Orleans. And I told them, I said, I don't mind if background tags the camera, if they look at the camera. Like, let it happen. And I'd never done that before.
Did that happen in the Vegas? There's a Vegas moment when the 2 old people are walking away and there's a rack focus to that was, you didn't plan this?
Oh no, those are real people. And and I told my ADs, let them tag the camera. There's a moment in a John Sayles film that I always have loved called Brother from Another Planet.
Yep.
Where they're up in Harlem. And I think it's back before the legal stuff got so tricky where you had to get like a waiver from everyone. And there's just a great moment where clearly they're shooting out of a car and they go by a corner in Harlem and there's some dude with sunglasses just gives a long look to the camera. And it just drew me into the film in such a way. Now, once again, the story has to be right for this.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
In staging something like there's a scene when it's sort of near the end of the piece, and it's a scene when Baum is arguing with someone from one of the Stearns, is saying the 200% or whatever it is, and everything's going away, and you've got a large audience, and everybody's getting up and leaving because they're all looking at their phones. Do you remember how that got staged for you?
Yeah, that was my AD, Matt Rebikoff, obviously orchestrated it, but I stood behind him and I changed it every time. So they had their progression. This group goes, then this group's, and I would be behind Matt. I'd go, no, call the second group now. Call the third group right on top of the second. And I tried to get this log jam going. I wanted it to be broken. And so we kept messing with it every single take. And Matt's like, are you going to change it every time? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to change it every time. And so that is how you get like this kind of confusion from the extras, because that moment, it's a real moment where when Bear started collapsing, I mean, the whole street, all of Wall Street, like went, what the hell? So I wanted that kind of cattle log jam in there. So yeah, we screwed with that every single take.
Very cool, very cool. Let's talk a bit more about staging. The piece, Tom, that you just showed us, the choices of these various locations that you had as they're assembling information. You do it a number of times in the film. How did you come about doing and choosing and what spaces? And particularly actually where there are actually two times. There's one where they go to the various, this is one was research one. There's another one where they're going and doing a series of interviews. How did those decisions come up for you to what places you're going to choose and how you're going to devise it? Did production designers come with photographs of spaces? How did this emerge?
Yeah, I mean, process felt pretty typical in that regard. Look, I think one of the great challenges of this piece was how to make information cinematic, but at the same point remaining true to what it is, which is a very kind of blue-collar, no-frills approach to work, right? These guys are sort of just doing their job every day in these crappy little offices, but it's incredibly important work. We wanted to capture that and be faithful to that and let that sort of inspire our aesthetic as much as possible. I felt like if I ever got too fancy, too sexy, too frivolous, anything with the camera that didn't represent the work and who these people were, I would lose the sort of authenticity of the piece. And specifically the challenge, it was, I think in many ways, this movie became for me, early on, it became a study of craft, because I realized, I don't think most people realize or have respect, maybe enough, for the craft of journalism, especially today, where everyone has a blog and a tweet, and they're all citizen journalists of the world. And I don't think that's true. I think everyone is entitled to their opinion. That's all it is. I think really great journalists are experienced. They do their job. They're incredible writers, incredible editors. They understand So I think what we really started to geek out on early was that craft and capturing all those little bits and pieces and remaining faithful to that and never romanticizing it or sensationalizing it, either the craft or the topic of sexual abuse. So we really kind of committed to that early, and how would we show that and make it one from moment to moment both different and compelling, and in some way explain, wow, this is tedious work. Like that section, for 2 weeks they stopped everything because, this is when Excel spreadsheets were about at the, peak of technology in terms of the work they were doing. There was no Google yet, none of that existed, but they realized they had these directories in their basement that the church put out, which basically, if they did their work as they did in that scene and work backwards, they could identify bad priests, because the church would take them out and label them as on sick leave or something like that. So they spent 2 to 3 weeks. That's all they did. They said, we all stopped all other aspects of our investigation and just poured through these. We took them home with us. We just did it till our eyes were falling out. And I think our job is to try to capture that, and capture the tedium and the relentlessness of it, but at the same point, make it something you could watch, so you didn't want to blow your head off,
And the choices, were these choices pre-production choices? Were they production choices?
I think they started with the script, understanding what that process was, look, hopefully every clip of that says a little bit about who those people are. Mike Resendez at that point was spending a lot of times either working or in a bar, so we see him in a bar doing it and getting cheap pizza, Sasha's at home. People are different places doing their work. There's one scene where we see Robbie in the cafeteria and you see BC High right across the street, another massive institution that plays later on in the movie. So it was trying to find these things that would both continue to inform story, even unconsciously or subconsciously, but propel the action.
And when you would stage a scene with your actors, because you have these serious dialogue scenes with this, what is your process? Do you let the actors find the space? Do you actually have a design? We were looking at Alejandro, where it has to be very, very specifically done. How would you go about doing a scene that has 5 or 6 characters in it and they're in fact talking to each other? What's the staging? What's the process where you find where they're going to sit, where they're going to stand? How does that emerge for you?
Well, totally different processes, those two, right? But I will think, to some degree, that's what I use rehearsals for. Alejandro mentioned Sidney's book, which is a great book. If anyone hasn't read it, you should. It's a great book. Sidney went as far to actually block in rehearsals. He would tape it out, like in theater, and do that. And I come from the theater, and I respect that, but I just never feel like that's helpful to me because of location. So normally my rehearsals are for understanding the material, getting everyone on the same page, and then, just show up and just clear the set and just work with the actors for as long as I need to. And, with these guys, we had a very good group of actors who were moving very quickly because they understood the material. They understood where there had to be. There was no grandstanding necessary. And I think, when
you were working with them, would you, first, just if you're on the set and you're just working with your actors at this moment, would you let them sort of run lines before you say, or they say, gosh, if I leaned up against the wall, this would be, or again, that just stated where you go?
Yeah, look, hopefully when you I'm someone who thinks good actors, smart actors can add a lot to a scene. And I do like to listen. There obviously comes a point where you have to stop listening and make some calls because you got to get through the day. And sometimes, especially with a group like this, they'll keep going. We had one scene at the end of the movie where it just became it's the one time we didn't make our day, and it was the scene in Marty Baron's office where Robbie confesses to the 20 priests, and it was because there was so much information and so much at stake. So many people were coming into the scenes from different points of view that we just spent hours talking about. I mean, hours. It was endless, and I normally don't allow that to happen, but for some reason I thought for that scene it was interesting, and it was helpful. But usually it's just getting a rough idea of the scene. Everyone has a position in this movie, so they know their space. They couldn't just suddenly say, I feel like, sauntering over there. Good actors won't do that. They'll know their purpose in that scene. So it's providing those moments, and that's not to say there aren't moments where there's just conflict. Hopefully you have that every day on some level, otherwise it's a really boring set, But for me, it's just like trying to find the truth of the scene, sending them away, and then figuring it out with my cinematographer, with Masa.
Got it. Alejandro, if I was thinking back to George and you both sitting next to each other and you both having fights, that you showed that fight. The fight, if I remember correctly, at the end, I'm talking about staging now, the fight between Fitzgerald and Glass at the end, if I remember correctly, there's no cut.
No.
How did you guys rehearse this?
Again, it was a long discussion of what I wanted to do was to, obviously these men at that time, they only eat meat, right? Only animal, and they eat an amount of pounds of animal. They were animal pelts, and they became in the status of animal living in those conditions, honestly. And so I want to represent that, man against nature, man against men, and suddenly kind of I want to remind that bear is just another creature that is an extension of our own reality in this organism. So we are just another kind of animal. That's it. And suddenly these men, I want to become two animals, again, fighting against each other. And I want to be brutal, not romanticize. Always I'm terrified to shoot violence because honestly, I don't know why, but violence looks so cool in screen. And that terrifies me because we have make of violence a very hip, a very cool thing, and we have enhanced violence by doing that because it looks amazing. And why? I don't know, but aesthetically it's brutally, you hate it, but you can't stop watching. And I come from a very violent country, which is not fun and not hip to see that. And I always try to question myself exactly the consequences of violence and what that means. And I want this to not be a fancy fight. I want to be as brutal and disgusting and violent. I mean, I don't know, pathetic in that sense. And so talking first, this was one of those kind of accidents that we have, that we lost the snow and that we have to, look for snow in the summer in New Zealand and all around Chile. And then we found the last airport of this continent, that is Ushuaia, which is at the end of the world. And we have this amazing location. So we found this river that in a way is similar to the geography of the last battle that we have shot just before when they go into that slide, we have shot everything in Calgary. So we have to find something that match geographically to that in the summer with snow, and nobody guaranteed that. So we found this piece. This river was perfect to allow a body to go, to horses to cross, all those technical things. But then we have to prepare the whole terrain and rocks taken out and all that thing. So we prepared the thing, and with Doc Coleman, we start, and Chivo, we start doing several blockings of the fight, again, with stunts.
Got it.
And find what will be truth and what can be, understood, the intentions of all these characters, but at the same time, and that the violence that they inflict to each other can be brutal, but at the same time, obviously stretch a little bit the possibilities of the physicality of it, but at the same time, still in the real kind of thing. And so anyway, we try many things, and it's again like a ballet. And then when Doc presents something, I start changing some things, how many steps, how we can go from here to here. And then when Chivo got the camera, we start going, and then sometimes we need to subordinate the movement to the camera, and sometimes the camera has to subordinate to the need of the action. So finding exactly the framing bit by bit. Okay, from here, he takes book, and then we go here. So it was like molecularly, as you basically do molecular work with a scene, we were molecularly understanding piece by piece, and then, okay, now how it's going to work, and then the stunts do it, the actors see it, they shit their pants, they say, really? Yes, really? And then they start doing it
How long did it take them to get ready so that you could actually shoot the two actors?
I think it didn't take a lot. I have to say that, fortunately, Leo and Tom are really young and very well fit. I think you have experience with this guy. He's like a maniac of that. It's scary. And he always was doing me things like that. He said that he can kill a guy in 2 seconds, and I believe it. He almost killed me, like here and here and here. He's like a very scary kind of. So Tom is really into that, and so I didn't have problem with that. And Leo is very physical at the same time. So I think, and they are very good friends. That helped a lot. So they have fun in a way. It was like kind of wrestling with a friend, and little by little, Dog was guiding them for not hurt themselves. And
there's blood that occurs within that. Were there blood bags that were part of it?
Yes, some blood, and then the knives do have some blood. So those kind of accidents. Yeah, but this is the blocking of that. That was a fun part, actually. I think.
How many days do you think you shot? How many times did you shoot it?
No, I shot a couple of times. That's
it?
Two takes.
Same day?
Yeah. I mean, that's the advantage of that. We rehearse a lot of times in a hotel with some, cautions and everything. And then once everything is understood, again, we go to that thing of the adrenaline to be present. And I think, as they were saying, I think actors is acting is reacting, and most of the most beautiful thing is everything can be planned and meticulous, but when the actor is good, is reacting to the moment. And I think Tom and all the guys there, every time that nature gave us something, I didn't have to remind them to be cold because they were really cold. Okay. And so they were really concentrated just in the thing. And when they hear a bird or something, they were reacting, and that adds the truthness of the thing. And in this case, they were really into that.
George, you have also this, which we saw now, a complex fight with all of these characters. How did that staging emerge for you?
Well, in this film, that was the equivalent of a dialogue scene. It's where the characters meet, the lead characters meet, and by their behaviour, by what they do, we learn something of them. So it was very important to structure it in a way that there was always...
I think we've lost your mic a little bit. I don't know if it came down, but yeah, there you go.
It was very... Can I do this?
There it is. Sure.
It's very important to structure it in a way where there was... I can't use both my hands now.
Exactly. We've got some help. Almost got you in there.
It was very, very important to structure it in a way where there was always a rising conflict, and that everybody behaved, because it was all the principal cast, really. Everyone behaved according to their character. So it was naturally very, very, very carefully prepared. And also the problem with these things, if you just do your kind of standard fight, I think we kind of glaze over as an audience. Yeah. So it had to be, in a sense, uniquely familiar. So it was Max who had a mask, a chain, through a door onto an unconscious Nux, and Furiosa, who didn't have her arm, and a shotgun that really didn't have any bullets, and all these things, and girls, the wives who'd never ever probably seen any violence, being brave enough to get involved. So all of that was very carefully choreographed. Again, the staging was done through the stunt crew, and in the same way that we block it out.
Would you have, because there are what, 6, 7, 8 people in this particular scene, would you have 6 or 7, 8 stunt people block it for you before?
Yeah, they would. For a film like this, everyone would have a matching stunt person, and the scene was storyboarded, but then it had to become real, so that it was blocked out. That was done with the stunt crew. And at a certain point, Tom's stunt double, Jacob, would take. Was Jacob?
Yeah,
it's great. And
they look. It's incredible. They look the same.
They look the same, and Jacob's also very, very skilled, and it's trust, isn't it? It's
incredible.
Being safe. Anyway, the point being is that Jacob would basically. You're right. Tom is very, very skilled, as is Charlize. They'd observe and pick it up really quickly, and then they'd swap. And if there's something where there might be some risk to one of the actor, they'd swap. In other words, it might be Tom Hardy working with Charlize's double Dana, or vice versa. So mix and matching through all of that. That's how the sequence is put together.
And how many days would it be in preparation, and how many days in shooting?
I would say over the period there would be a lot of preparation. It might be several days. PJ Voten, who's an extraordinary AD and one of the producers of the film. How many days do we take to shoot then? 5 days. 5 days to shoot. How many? The rehearsal was intermittent. We were rehearsing a lot of things.
But 5 days with your actors then, and actually shooting that sequence.
Yeah.
You know what I learned? I don't know, George, if it was the same. It was the first film that I did with this kind of action, and what I learned of action is almost like it has to be precise, obviously, because you cannot put in danger the thing. But it's like making love scenes, like sex scenes. They have to be
exactly
incredible thing. And what I found that it was very challenging. That is not the action or the physical thing, but is if then the transition of what that scene is about, then to go to the close-up and that the transition from that physicality to some emotion, that was the difficult part. You know, like where it goes at, because it's not like the action, it's like now what the actor feels after that. That's what I found that is the tricky part of those.
But you also
scenes.
you made a choices from your hero now. His non-use of language in the beginning of that sequence, where he doesn't speak to them, he gestures to them. It's quite powerful in terms of who he is at this moment. Like words mean nothing.
Well, he's a pretty reduced human being. He's caught, he's trapped, he's branded, and he's used as a living blood bag, and he's totally passive, and of course he's been alone, so he's not used to talking. And if you track the movie, his first word, first on-camera line is in that scene when he says water, yeah. and then gradually stops grunting, and then fuller sentences form, and by the time...
Interesting about the word water, it's almost the last line in your movie on that type. It was water as well, considering where water is in all of our lives and how it's going to be affecting our lives. But before I go to that, I want to... I have 2 more sets of questions for you. But in the staging of the sandstorm in the beginning, where they're all outside before they actually leave Mars, in setting that kind of thing up and getting the actors to sort of be in that moment and staging that scene, and I have no idea how you did it, this darkness and all that phenomenal sort of sand that you either added or was part of it. Could you explain how that you did stage that?
I was on the stage in Budapest. There's a big stage. They're bigger than the Bond stage. You got a 65 feet to the gantry. The cubic capacity is bigger than the Bond stage. And also by having a brand new green screen helps a lot. Brand new green gives you a quality So the stuff shooting in Wadi Rum, Jordan, and on stage, I now can't tell the difference. It's mix and match. But the stage for the storm, better do it in a low-key light, because you're going to get away with more. But I want to be able to see everything, which is also very important. And how heavy is the storm? And I don't care what you say, those ritters with the big blades, they're not bloody good. They're only good from like 6 feet, honestly. So if you really want the serious stuff, I had 2 707 engines doing this little unlashed planks. The problem is it burns kerosene. That's not too healthy. But you need as much blast as possible because I want to blow the cameraman over as well as the actors. It's still not enough. So what I had is if there's 7 actors or whatever the number, I have 7 actors with 7 guys completely covered in black. Each actor's on a cable. So they're fighting the guy who's holding them back. He's in black because I know I'm not going to see him back there. So they're on about a 30 or 40 foot, 50 foot cable. And they're going to jerk him around. It's not rehearsed. You just say action. And they're trying to do the dialogue at the same time. I've got a guy who's like an anchor yanking him as wind would blow. If that wind was 180K, which it would be, you would never know where it was coming from. So I try and throw the actors as much as possible. And at the end of it, check, you okay? Yeah, we love it. Okay, let's go again. Good. And we go again. And whatever your wind machines are, whatever your combinations, because by then you get your combination down to too much dust, white blocks it out, too much smoke blocks it out. You want hard vermiculite with a teeny bit of mixture. It's like mixing a vodka martini, actually. Not too much vermouth. So you can see through it, because then I know it's still not going to be enough. So then I'll have the digital house will lay over each shot very sharp vermiculite, as it were, fake digital vermiculite. So you gradually layer it in it. I love to grade the movies afterwards, so I sit down. Usually the cameraman's gone, so I grade the whole movie. And it's fast. It's great how, and I grade, when you have those layers over, you can then literally grade them, say more, less, or darker. So it's all in the grading and the acting.
The last 2 questions. Where are you in the editing room in your process? Are you at home giving notes to your editor somewhere else? Are you in the editing room? What's your process of editing right now? And I know it's changed since we've been working.
I tend to overlap. Once I've got into a director's cut, I'm already prepping the next one. I'm shooting in 8 weeks now in Australia. And so I've got a full crew there working right now. So I like to, because I get really bored. And I think I've learned many different ways in the editing room. Sit there, choose the shot, choose the frame. And by the time, if you don't watch it, you're going to get really blunt. It's a bit like a comedian telling the joke. 2 times, it's okay. 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, I'm going to change the joke. And so, also every edit is exclusive. You must be very choosy about the number of times you sit down and watch the whole movie, because you're going to get so bored with your own work that you're going to start cutting things out that you shouldn't be. So I always watch incrementally, scene by scene, never put together. And there's always the horrible day. That's the only day I start to get anxious. I'm going to watch the director, the full cut. By myself with an editor. You know it's going to be too long. Usually it's, there's going to be some good stuff and there's going to be some long stuff. But the prep in the editing room, I went from choosing everything to now when I'm shooting, this requires a very good editor, by the way. And I work with 3 editors, 3 different editors, mostly Petros Galia. I turn them loose. I see the rushes, say, that's good. Every night I see rushes. Afterwards, say, right, can I see what you cut today? See what I cut today? Okay, that's working. Leave it for now. Move on. So by the time we get to the end of the movie, I've pretty well 2.5 weeks off the director's cut. And then I always know, I can remember every shot and which was the better one for light or for performance or speed or whatever it is. There's always that shot you remember. It's odd how you remember everything. And so they can come later. I don't get choosy the during of, I want to get it on the wall, I want to see it. And then from there, I leave the editor to it. He said, I've got a reel. You want to come see a reel? I'll go and see a reel, okay. And what's interesting, by not being there, I'll sit there with a reel and make notes. And what's interesting, usually at the end of it, the editor might say, bugger, you're absolutely right. I've been thinking about half those things myself, but I want to hear what you thought. So in a funny kind of way, it's a primitive computer. You know, so I'm staying the freshman, and he's getting blunt in that room. I don't care who you are, that's what happens, okay? Then by the time we get to the director's cut, the same thing happens. Right now, that's how I work. Don't sit there.
Got it.
Start thinking about the next one.
Got it. George, where are you in the editing room? What's your process?
Well, in the past, I've been there for every cut, literally every splice in the old days. In this film was atypical in that we basically had to shoot in Africa, but editing room was back in Australia.
Right. And
really, I'd look at dailies on the iPad, usually on the long trip home, and back in Australia, Margaret Sixel, who also happens to be my wife, was cutting the movie, so it was dumped in her lap, as it were.
Okay.
In this case, I would work, would see what was happening in the cut, but when we came up against what seemed to be an intractable problem, because this was a very complex movie, to keep a kind of coherence, a spatial coherence with all this stuff going on, is really, really important. There had to be very rigorous causal relationship, one shot to the next. At the same time, it's not just colour and movement. You're really trying to get those moments where there is a progression of character and the relationship of character and the information when the exposition when the audience needed the exposition, the withholding of information, and then I like the notion of drama being the well orchestrated withholding of information, and Margaret was such that if there was a problem, we'd discuss it, and the best thing for me was to walk away and give her the time, and she'd come and usually find a really, really good response. But that thing of the being blunted is very, very interesting because, I very, very soon you get to the rhythm of the movie and so on. And I often think of Percy Sledge. You remember Percy Sledge who sang that song, When a Man Loves a Woman? Yeah. And he sang it every night almost for 23 years. And could you imagine what that would, having that same thing? Well, it's exactly the same thing with the movie. And one of the things I learned, in the old days when painters used to look at their composition in the mirror, nowadays you can flip the screen. And it's quite a shocking thing because just like a composer would remember the same music, we have intense memory, so it's burnt into your brain. And flipping it is really, really interesting because you do not, your brain is already almost hardwired to see it a certain way. So
it's all about dynamics. And if you get blunt, you're going to lose the dynamic. So you've got to step back and keep constantly being fresh. Like being a painter, I'm a painter, and you step back, you stare at it and walk away and leave it. Or like Marty does, which I suddenly realized, it kind of makes sense, but it does prolong your process. He will cut and then go on holiday and return and look at it like 6 months later. I said, how does he do that? But I think he comes back and goes, oh my God, and then go, what, that, and goes, boom, 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 boom.
Yep, makes sense.
It's sharpness, isn't it?
It's what?
Sharpness.
Yes, there is a way that you can almost force the amnesia. If you get into the space and you say, I've never seen this before, where you can watch it and you're watching it and it's a little bit like running your hand over, some wood, sandpapered wood, and you feel a little glitch, and you say, okay, we've got a problem there. But it's a tricky thing. And it varies film to film. In the past, I've often done a lot of editing
Now, the
myself.
technology has changed so much for all of us that I wonder whether you are also, how that has affected you in the editing room for both of you. I mean, obviously, everything's faster and everything's
It's way
immediate.
faster.
And to some degree, that's an incredible advantage, but another degree, that also may not allow you to, in fact, both of you are talking about, have the perspective you're talking about.
I think if you're aware that you need the perspective, you can find a way to get it. It might be just, going for a walk around the block. It might be because one of the major jobs of the filmmaker is basically to be the guardian of the narrative. You're there trying to see every part in the context of the whole, and the whole is always privileged over the parts. And providing you know that, and you, it's a mosaic art. It's very much like music, and the way the little bits fit together, you're trying to keep dispassionate about it, not carry none of the emotion you might have had on the set or whatever your feeling was on set. On set, I always like to be neutral, like really neutral. If you're feeling down, that's okay. If you're feeling euphoric, that's dangerous because everything is good. I don't know how people made movies on cocaine because everything would have been great. I just don't know how to do it. So I think you look for those sort of neutral places to let the footage do the work.
Speak to you. Got it. Alejandro, where are you in the editing process, particularly on this film?
I think very much, what Ridley and George has said is basically the whole thing. For me, it has been changing the same. I edit myself Amores Perros, my first film in my studio, and I was getting crazy. It was 8 months by myself in the office doing it, and it was trying to find the whole thing. And then fortunately in 21 Grams, I find a great partner, which is Stephen Mitrione, which we have been, he has been editing my film since then, which was great because I think we have developed for all these years kind of a silent communication. He has great taste. He understands what I like, what I respond to. I spoke with him in great length. What is the objective of each scene? What I'm trying to get. I'm very close to because I really enjoy it. I think editing is rewriting the film. I think literally you can destroy a good performance or a good film in the editing room, or you can save and make an incredible scene that didn't exist, and you can rewrite it in the editing room. Yeah. And so I'm a true believer in that process. I understand it very well. I'm a frustrated musician, so I think editing is like music, and rhythm is all. Honestly, rhythm is God. And if you don't have rhythm, or the film doesn't have rhythm, no matter how good it is, it will never get into people's vein. Nobody will be moving the feet emotionally. So you have to find that. And for me, it takes me time because I'm absolutely a chronic, unsatisfied person. I'm never happy about it, and I just think that every time can be better and better, and I like it, and then it's true the next day I arrive and it's a piece of shit, and one day I'm like the greatest, and the next day I want to commit suicide, and it's like, so things are not working, and then suddenly works, but then, so it's a little bit struggling process for me, joyful but struggling. I'm not saying that I'm bipolar. Maybe I am. I don't know. No, but it's just my mood change. My relation with the film evolves every day. Yeah. And so I try things. I don't restrict myself to try things. In this case, it was particularly very strange because we shot the film, and then because we were caught without snow, we were planning to shoot so suddenly I came to LA with a very strange situation. I have most of the film, but I didn't have the ending of the film, and I didn't have the beginning of the film, and I didn't have a very important middle section of the film. So I have like a very strange thing. So I start editing as we were in pre-production looking for finishing the film when we have to release in December. So it was a very stressful. I have never been in a situation like that. Normally I take time to edit and it's joyful, and then the music. This time was literally a torture because I was editing something without the right pieces in pre-production, solving problems that probably will never be. So, I mean, it was very weird. anyway, I have the piece, and then when I shoot finally the ending and the beginning and all that, when I integrate it, it's basically all these parts of all the back, all these kind of delusion, when he's delusional in sickness and he's memorizing his wife and who he was and all this dream sequence. Every time that I put them together, they mean different things in the film depending on how long they were, where I put it, So all these little things of the super, those mystical things of him, internal travels, how the people will relate internally with the guy that hasn't talked one word in the whole film. I want the people to get what was going into him. It was so delicate clockwork, because if it was too much, it was too corny, it was too little, there's nobody. So that took me a lot of time to find where those pieces will be. And we did several things. And then, as Ridley said, when you get too close and you lose perspective or enthusiasm, that's the most dangerous thing, because I compare this like when you are in a party and you have drink a little bit too much, and you know that if you drink the last vodka, you know that you will do and you will be lost. So you have to be careful when is that last drink. And so I know that I have to solve a lot of things, but I know that I spend more time in that room, then I will be even useless to the editor. So I agree with Ridley. I have to go out, let him try some things, and then come back. But in this case, unfortunately, normally I do that. In this case, I didn't have time. Right. I really need to deliver the film. So it was horrible, because I know that I was not enjoying it anymore. But then you have to make the best decision. And sometimes I have become very cynical with myself. I cut my fingers. I don't care how good the scene it is. If the film doesn't serve, as you said, the whole, even if it's the best scene I have shot or the best moment, and an actor will hate me, I cut my fingers, and that's it. And in this case, I took out so much great things. But I didn't care. I'm a butcher. I'm a very, and that's
editor
what
is butcher.
Anyway, it's beautiful. I think the best line was that Jean-Luc Godard said that every frame is a moral decision, and if you get to that scare that one frame more or one frame less, and I believe that one frame more sometimes has changed the whole meaning of a scene, and that's super scary to find, because then you know the responsibility you have finding every second of your film.
Yes, 24 frames of the second, every one. Tom, for you, where are you in the editing room?
I'm probably back where these guys were a little while ago, where I'm present still all the time. I've done 5 films with my editor, Tom McCarthy. We have a very specific way of working. I was probably taking a few more breaks, like giving him, I'd come in half day, but the edit room's a block from my house, so I'd pop in more often than he probably liked. But, I think with this specific film, more than our other films, we did a lot of edit room micro screenings for 5, 7, 8 people, just as hopefully people not connected with the film industry at all, just friends. It's a great thing about living in New York. You can find people who aren't connected to the film industry. And so we would it's kind of true, right? We would do that, and it was really helpful just for information, just because it was so informationally driven. And also, we would just find exciting, we'd start to realize where we could hang our hat on the script. For instance, Alejandro mentioned the survivors and those performances earlier, and very early on, almost everyone we had come in, and these are people who aren't necessarily as adept or articulate about talking about cuts as soon as they end. So it's really exciting because you're pushing them to talk about it. And to the one, people would say, when I met that first survivor, Phil Saviano, I was like emotionally connected to the movie. Up to that part, I was intellectually interested, but I met Phil, and my heart was in the movie. And so we'd be, all right, when do we meet Phil? Somewhere end of second reel. We got a sense of what we're doing and maybe how quickly we want to get there. And that process was just really interesting. And also, it is a love-hate with that room because it's brutal, right? Because it's honest. And what you are confronted with often are your mistakes. You gloss over your victories, you take them for granted, and then you just see all your mistakes, and you get very personal because you feel like you were the guy out there fighting the fight, and you came back with squirrel meat or something. And I feel like with this one, it's very helpful us to sit in a room just behind people and just kind of physically feel them, what they're doing, how they're connecting when they're leaning forward. And I think all of my films, as my editor always points out, start a little slow. It's on purpose. I like people to have to lean in, to pay attention, to make that decision, to engage with the movie or not. And I think with this one, we really had to find that balance because we had a long way to go.
Adam, the complexity of the editing of this movie is actually pretty remarkable. From individual scenes where you're cutting to to slowing things down. I'm just thinking when you meet Dr. Barry for the first time, the choices that you've made some of them may have been in the shooting, but some of them very well may have been editorially, and obviously all the breaks and all the explanations of various times. What was this editing process for you, and what is it when you were in the editing room?
Well, we a lot of that was in the script with the explanations from the iconic kind of pop celebrities and the slowdowns and the freeze frames. But what happened was, half of directing is hiring really great people, and we got Hank Corwin, who's an amazing editor. So early on, when I met with him, I told him, I said, go to town, go take any germ of what we have and just try what you want to try. And he was like, really? I'm not going to get fired? And I was like, no, go for it. So I would come in every week and kind of look at some rough cut scenes he had, and they were really exciting. And some of them I knew went too far, but I didn't say anything at that point. So I kind of started the first half of our editing process almost like a hippie teacher from like the 1970s who was like, refused to give out grades and everyone's cool. And then what happens is we start to get the movie. The movie starts to come into shape, and then I become like Otto Preminger. Then it's like, then I'm doing what Alejandro was talking about. I'm counting frames, and I really treat it like we've got 2 hours of like how often in anyone's life do they get to somewhat, curate 2 hours, and I treat every second of that like it's huge. So then Hank was very surprised because I started going through the movie and then being quite brutal on it and saying, no, trim 3 frames off here, make sure this happens here, bring this voice in here. And he was like, wow, what happened to you, So the best moment was we would screen every week because this movie's built, The Big Short's built to have a conversation with the audience. We needed to see how the audience was interacting. And just like Tom said, sitting in that audience, you can feel it when you're part of not even so much looking at the cards or scores, but just feeling an audience interacting with it. So it accelerated our editing process because almost every week I was screening with a test audience just to see how they felt. So one night it was like 1 a.m. and we're cranking away and Hank's tired and he just gets frustrated and he's like, you know what? Why are we doing another screening? Fuck them. Fuck them. And there's a long beat and I just go, Hank, who's them? And he goes, I don't know. I'm tired. And I'm like, Hank, them is me. He's like, I'm just tired. So yeah, it was really 2 gears. The one gear was like exploration. We brought our composer in really early. So he was like writing music for these kind of experimental scenes that we were just trying. Everything was open. We tried everything. And then the second gear is, now let's make a movie. And then it becomes kind of a different gear.
So this is really a 2-year editing process for you?
What's that?
Was it 2-year editing process for you? 2 gears.
2 gears.
Boy, I love the idea of 2 years. 2 gears, I'm better.
I actually just produced on a movie that was a 1.5-year editing process. Not fun. No, this was just 2 gears. You can clearly feel it go from exploration to we're now making a movie. And I find both equally as enjoyable.
I'm thinking, because you said something in the script. When we first actually meet Baum and he's walking across the street in New York on that telephone, and there are a number of freeze frames and there are a number of cutaways as well. Was this all scripted, or is there as we were all talking about, are you rewriting your movie in the editing room?
So here's what it is. So yes, they were scripted. There were definitely voiceover with implied freeze frames there. But what happens in the edit room is Hank did this beautiful thing with Carell in the scene that you guys saw, which I had written freeze frame, but he did a double freeze frame and he chopped up the dialogue. And this is what a great editor does for you. And I was like, oh, that is really cool. And out of nowhere, he pulled in that Guns N' Roses song. And I told him, I go, I've used that song in another movie. And he's like, it works. And I was like, looks like we're using it again. So it just all became expanding on the movie. The big one was the fact that we wanted to show where American culture was at while we were all missing this really obvious bubble. If you look at the math now, it was so obvious, the housing bubble and the collapse that was coming. And what were we thinking about? So we had the idea of, like, I had written into the script that you would see music videos, cutaways of kind of trash news. And Hank really took that and went even further. And he just, at one point, his boldest choice was he had this Ludacris video that off of Christian Bale, he just bops into this Ludacris video. And it took me like 3 minutes to adjust to it. And then I was like, I like that. And then all of a sudden that started changing the movie, where we could jump into American culture whenever we wanted. And the chapter headings were discovered in the edit room as well, where we would do a quote and then show images of American society.
I'm told your famous quote about from the Washington, D.C. bar, which I love very much, which is "Truth is poetry and everybody hates poetry," is actually your line.
Yeah, we looked high and low for quotes for that. And I finally said, like, I want a line that says something like, "Truth is like poetry and everyone fucking hates poetry." And Hank was like, let's just put that in. And I'm like, you can't attribute it to someone. I should have called Tom and begged him to let me attribute it to him. But so I finally at one point put the old baseball manager, Billy Martin. And then I thought, like, probably like Deborah Martin, his daughter, is going to call and sue us or something. So when in doubt, just always say "overheard" in a blank, blank, blank. So yeah, that quote's fake. The other two are real. The other two are definitely real.
My last question for you all, actually it has two parts. Actually, I was thinking, in fact, about Einstein said that the most important question to be asking ourselves is, do we believe that the universe and the world is friendly or hostile? What do you believe? Is the universe friendly or hostile?
The universe.
Yes.
Well, I've done 4 science fictions now. I'm doing one right now about the universe. I think the universe is friendly. We have to understand it to be friendlier.
Got it. George?
Well, there's a lot that say it's indifferent, but from a human point of view, it certainly can be both. I mean, and I think it's one of the fundamental struggles of life, as to how to find that balance, or that understanding. It's very easy to see what appears to be the chaos of the universe and fall into despair, but on the other hand, it is truly wondrous. The more we get to know, the more we get to really know it. We're extraordinarily privileged to be in life. And I think that's the eternal struggle. It's at the heart of virtually everything we do. So, but if you ask me right now, I think it's basically friendly.
Alejandro?
I like about the I mean, this indifference is true when it's from the perspective that you see things. I think that I have changed, and I think that now in the stage that I'm now, I think I'm just part of it. So I mean, I'm built by the same. I have understand from a very different education that I have, that we were implanted here in this paradise, and we come from this kind of, we are beings that we are used this as a garden of heaven, and we are using nature for our purpose, and we will go to heaven, but don't belong here. We are just here temporarily. I think suddenly now that is so clear that I'm made of carbon and fire and water and oxygen. I'm just an organism that comes from the same materials of all this miraculously alive thing. And when I'm aware of that now, such joy comes from me to see that I'm just suddenly part of this absolutely organism that is in ecstasy alive. And suddenly when I recognize that, and especially being exposed 1 year in nature and see how it changed and how fragile, and also, becoming part of it integrated me with that, and not being apart from it and, oh my God, this is threatening to me. No, I'm that. And suddenly understanding that in that perspective, I think is extraordinarily friendly and miraculously, and especially to be aware of that. That's how I feel now.
Tom?
Well, first of all, congratulations, because I've been doing press for 5 months and no one's asked me that question. So it's incredible. And it's weird because I'm a generally pretty positive, happy person, I think, but I would say my instinct was to say hostile. I do. I just think it's how I feel about the world right now. It feels like a very hostile place in every way, from the environment to politics to religion to humanity. And maybe this is the moment during your interview where I cry. No, but last one. He got me on the last one. He told me you'd get me. No, but I do. I don't want to spend too much time philosophizing it beyond that. But that was my instinct when you asked the question, so I'm going to stick with that.
Thank you, Tom.
I was just laughing at the idea of like calling a black hole eating a galaxy, orca whale chewing into a great white shark, a neutron star friendly. I think the universe is chipper. No, I think the universe is merciless, fair, and healthy. And sometimes friendly. No, I think I think the universe is a force that is immovable and so far beyond us. I do think it would chew you up in a second, but I think it is fair, and it is on a course that is like, its footprints are like mountains, and for us to even use terms to even try and describe it are hilarious.
Great. Advice to a new director.
New director, shoot stuff, put it up online. Don't wait for your opportunity. Don't wait for your connection. Grab cameras. There's tons of them now. They're cheap. The internet is an amazing thing. If you're in some weird town in North Dakota, start a film festival. Just shoot. Don't wait for it to come to you.
Advice to a new director, Tom.
Find some good people to collaborate with. Like, find your little posse. Find some people that think like you do or don't think like you do, and engage with them and surround yourself with those people. I think young artists need that.
Great. Alejandro, advice to a new director.
I think not be, liberate from fear of failure. I think that, learn to be humble, to be learning while you are doing things, because that's the only way you will realize that you are moving or what is going wrong. But conceptualize things and not doing it by fear to fail, that's the worst trap. So doing it liberate you from fear just by doing it.
Right. George?
Definitely shoot regardless, and really try to shoot something that you really want to say. Find things that you really want to say.
Ridley, advice to a new director.
If I'd realized what I know now, I'd have been a hedge fund trader. Because this is fucking hard work. Are you all directors in this room? All directors, producers, right? It's tough, correct? Yeah. It's tough. And the best line ever in advertising, which is also a lesson in life, is just do it. Nike.
Well, perfect to stop this part because you all do it so well, and thank you for sharing with us. Thank you.